Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this particular meeting. I call to order this meeting of the Oversight Committee. It is 9 a.m. or 0900 hours. Ms. Payne, please proceed with the roll call.
Dr. Cummings?
Here.
Mr. Margot?
Here.
Dr. Hernandez?
Here.
Mr. Montgomery?
Here.
Dr. Patel?
Yeah.
Dr. Rice?
Here.
Dr. Rosenfeld?
Here.
We have a quorum.
For the record, Mr. Montgomery and Dr. Cummings are joining us via video conference today. This is an option permitted by the Open Meetings Act, and they will count towards a quorum as long as we can see and hear them. That includes you, Mr. Montgomery. We will rely on CPRIT's IT team to make all of this work. We appreciate all that they do behind the scenes to make the meetings run very smoothly. And you can cut the video conference out anytime they ask a lot of questions. Please don't worry about it. Members, you have the draft minutes from the May 18th Oversight Committee meeting in your agenda packet behind tab 1. Are there any corrections to the minutes as circulated? The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the May 18th Oversight Committee meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Our next agenda is public comment. Texans created CPRIT. Opening our meetings with public comment underscores this board's commitment to transparency and accountability. Ms. Doyle, has CPRIT received any requests to provide public comment?
No, sir.
Thank you. At this time, I will recognize Dr. LeBeau to introduce Dr. Ramos, a fellow San Antonian I'm so proud to have here today, who is joining us to provide us today's grantee presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce Dr. Robert Ramos, who is the Dean of the Long School of Medicine and the Vice President for Medical Affairs at the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio. As many of you know, the Long School of Medicine has over 1,500 faculty, 900 medical students, and 865 residents and fellows, and cares for 2.4 million patients annually. Dr. Ramos has a stellar academic career and is recognized for many academic accomplishments, including training over 29 graduate students and fellows, many of whom who have entered academic careers and have achieved great success in their own right. He has won numerous teaching and patient care awards, and too many that I cannot name them all for you. He's also served in a number of national academic roles, including chairing the scientific affairs for the American Society of Hematology and serving as their congressional and media representative. And he is an accomplished and renowned researcher in his own right, having published over 190 research papers. He's been continuously funded by the National Institutes of Health for over 3 decades and has chaired multiple NIH and American Cancer Society study sections and policy panels. He has multiple patents and has co-founded 2 biotechnology companies that translated new compounds into clinical trials. His laboratory has isolated and characterized multiple novel cytokines and identified several DNA mutations that are known to lead to leukemia. And he has identified several key components of DNA repair pathways. Of note is that he's created a drug development consortium when he was at the University of Florida as the chairman of medicine that translated university science to the clinic, which is an important role and a great interest to CPRIT. One of his interesting accomplishments is that he's the author of a HarperCollins leadership book called Einstein's Boss, 10 Rules for Leading Genius. so he may have some advice for this Oversight Committee. He has been elected to the Liaison Committee on Medical Education, the accrediting body for U.S. and Canadian medical schools, and has been recognized for his accomplishments by being elected to the American Society of Clinical Investigation, the Association of Professors of Medicine, the American Clinical and Climatologic Association, and the Association of American Physicians. So welcome, Dean Ramos.
I'm exhausted just listening. Oh, my goodness. I love what I do. Thank you, Dr. Hernandez, for getting me to the correct room. Esteemed Chair, Dr. Patel, we share a love of Dr. Verghese. And what a coup to recruit Dr. LeBeau, who is internationally renowned for not only her cancer research, but her just kind-hearted but crucial leadership in the field of hematologic malignancies for decades. And so we are so thrilled. All the Cancer Center folks in Texas were thrilled when Dr. LeBeau accepted. It is my honor to give you 15 minutes of really an overview of the impact, the transformational impact that CPRIT has had on UT Health San Antonio, which will impact Texas. And so we're going to go from the very specific to the very general in this presentation. Every photo you see is supported by CPRIT. Every person you see, except for Dr. Biden, of course. So she came to talk about cancer screening in Hispanics at our Cancer Center about 6 months ago. Next slide, yes. I hold equity in Dialectic Therapeutics, which we'll talk about because it's been supported by CPRIT, and our lead compound is DT2216. I have a strict conflict of interest management plan in place, supervised by Dr. Bill Henrich, my president. And so I take vacation every hour I spend working for the company. Now, that's important, but it will benefit UT and Texas. Next slide, please. So I want to start from the general, the most basic foundational CPRIT awards, CPRIT Recruitment Awards. And UT Health San Antonio has received 8 first-time Tenure-Track awards at $2 million each, 1 Rising Star award, and then 4 Established Investigator awards. And these established investigators are really at the very top of their field. Reuben Harris is a Howard Hughes Medical Institute scholar, one of only 6 in Texas. David Gaius has chaired multiple NIH committees as our RAD-ONC Vice Chair of Research. And then Patrick Sung is really one of the most famous DNA repair investigators in the world. He's our Greehey Children's Cancer Institute Director. Dr. Patel, you should get to know him. He's a wonderful human. I highlight Dr. Wasmuth here. She's a minority woman who was able to solve the structure of the androgen receptor oncoprotein bound to DNA. It's a transcription factor that turns on genes that cause prostate cancer. No one's ever been able to solve this. That's her structure on the cover of Molecular Cell. But that interface, how they interact, is a key new drug target for prostate cancer by our CPRIT-funded Center for Innovative Drug Discovery. And this will be a theme throughout the entire presentation, that one CPRIT grant leads to another. Next slide, please. So our return on investment for the recruitment awards have been spectacular. We have added 27 new external grants, 34 million in new grants to Texas, and 90% of those have been from NIH. Why is that important? Because of the facilities and administration, F&A, indirect cost. 53% comes back, helps us run our buildings, keep the lights on, hire the maintenance workers. And so it's very important that the grants that come back on a return on investment are federal grants because of the federal indirects. But more importantly, these recruitment awards have led to increased mentorship of our graduate students, our new faculty, which has resulted in additional funding. And then they create the environment that attracts further talented scientists in a virtuous circle. The vignette I show here is a collaboration between 2 CPRIT scholars that did not know each other before they came, that together just recently with our new partially funded by CPRIT cryo-EM facility at UT Health San Antonio solved a DNA repair structure called BCDX2. Why is that important? Because BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutant breast and ovarian cancers require this for maintaining replication forks. That's how they divide. We can target this new compound using our Center for Innovative Drug Discovery funded by CPRIT. So it's a new drug target in this relatively rare breast and ovarian cancer population. Next slide, please. We've also received a large number of academic research and prevention awards, 65 total academic research grants given to 39 different investigators, $69 million in total cost. In addition, we have a massive cancer prevention effort at our institution led by Emily Ramirez, a National Academy of Medicine Hispanic woman from Laredo herself who discovered that there's a liver cancer epidemic in South Texas Hispanics. Her data is shown here. It's been highlighted nationally, in which South Texas Hispanics have twice the rate of liver cancer than anyone else in the United States. While CPRIT funding has remained stable in the right-hand table over the last 5 years, CPRIT has increased our ability to maintain and increase our NIH funding and all of our federal funding. You'll see that our federal funding has gone from $122 million in 2018, the year I started, January 2018, and increased to $210 million in federal funding. Again, the indirects are 53% on that. It really helps us maintain our infrastructure at UT Health San Antonio. Next slide, please. I'd like to highlight then the next type of CPRIT grant, the CPRIT core grants. And so I'm going to highlight two CPRIT core grants we have. One is the flow cytometry shared resource. And flow cytometry is an ancient technology. Actually, I remember when it was first invented, but it was about 35 years ago. The reason I highlight this shared resource is that it supports such an enormous amount of investigators, an enormous amount of grants. 113 grants and contracts are supported by this CPRIT resource. 85 million in total extramural funding rely on this shared resource funded by CPRIT. The instruments, state-of-the-art instruments, are listed on the left, and I won't go through them. Services are listed on the right. And again, one key component of this is that they train others. They just don't do the analysis themselves. They make other laboratories better. The next shared resource I'd like to highlight is this Center for Innovative Drug Discovery. I mentioned that earlier with Dr. Wasmuth's new target, the interface between the androgen receptor and the ERG oncoprotein that generates the prostate cancer gene expression that results in the neoplastic transformation in the prostate, is this Center for Innovative Drug Discovery. It's a joint effort between our sister institution, UT San Antonio, mainly undergraduate institution, 5 miles up the road, up I-10, and then UT Health San Antonio. And we do high-throughput screening. Our scientists identified a target, and we can screen it through either biochemical screening and high-throughput screening or computer-aided drug design. We use the supercomputer at UT Austin for this. And then we come up with compounds that then Dr. McCarty at UTSA, Medicinal Chemistry, will make those compounds. The bottom arrow shows our targets and our compounds that are in different stages of development. Go all the way to the right and look at the clinical trials. We have 5 compounds from our science in clinical trials. This is very good for an institution that we're about 50th out of 165 medical schools in terms of size, in terms of budget. Probably the largest school that doesn't have its own hospital in the nation. But we are building a mainly cancer hospital called UT Health Multi-Specialty Research Hospital, which will focus on clinical trials. And it's scheduled to open September of 24. I am the chairman of that board, having previous hospital experience, management experience at the University of Florida. I want to call your attention to the BCL-XL PROTAC. And that's the drug that's been supported by CPRIT. And so we'll spend the next few minutes talking about that because it's such an important new technology. It's so revolutionary that I think the CPRIT Oversight Committee really should understand this new technology because you'll see it more and more. So the Center for Innovative Drug Discovery is an expert in this technology. What is it? Well, it stands for Protein-Targeted Chimera. It's a new technology that doesn't just inhibit proteins, it targets them for degradation within the cell's garbage disposal called the proteasome. So there's 3 components to a PROTAC compound. The first component, this top figure over on the left, is this protein of interest ligand. So you've got to have something that binds to what protein you want to destroy. Then you have a linker, and then there's another ligand that binds to an E3 ligase. What's an E3 ligase? Well, it's the name of a family of proteins that add ubiquitin, a small little protein, on the target protein, and that's the signal for go to the garbage disposal. The garbage disposal is a proteasome. So when the PROTAC binds to the protein of interest and then pulls in the E3 ligase, which adds ubiquitin to the protein of interest, then the ubiquitin, as the lower figure on the right-hand side, gets shuttled to the proteasome and chewed up into amino acids. Well, the cool thing about this technology is that chemical can do it again. It can recycle again and again without in the cell. So even long after it's gone out of the plasma, it's within the cancer cell doing this again and again. And so there's 9 PROTAC companies. We are the only one that's still privately held. We're the only one funded by CPRIT. The others have a market cap of well over $10 billion. So we hope that this is going to be a huge win for the state of Texas and for CPRIT. Our company's headquarters are in Dallas. So we use this technology to create a BCL-XL degrader. And it's really important because BCL-XL mediates chemotherapy resistance in about half of cancers. So, for example, in pancreatic cancer, the gemcitabine, a common cancer drug for pancreatic cancer, damages that pancreatic cancer cell just as much as a normal cell, but the pancreatic cancer cell does not die. It's zombie. It's got holes all over it, DNA damage all over it, but it fails to die because it overexpresses BCL-XL. If you can degrade BCL-XL, then the chemotherapy will kill the cancer cell. But platelets absolutely rely on BCL-XL. So every drug against BCL-XL has caused dose-dependent, on-target thrombocytopenia to the point of bleeding, to the point of 10 or 20,000 platelets per microliter. So no one's been able to make a drug against BCL-XL until us. And the way we did it was through this PROTAC technology. We used an E3 ligase ligand that targeted VHL, which is not present in platelets, so that then BCL is not destroyed in platelets. It's only destroyed in those cells that have VHL. Where is VHL overexpressed? Cancer cells. Next slide. So here's the drug. It's very complicated. It's called DT-2216. And on the left-hand side at the bottom chemical structure, you see what binds to BCL-XL, and then the linker, and then what binds to VHL. This was selected out of hundreds of compounds about 7 years ago for high potency and specificity, high chemical stability. It's not metabolized. It does not induce thrombocytopenia in rats or mice. And my contribution to this was that they were testing this for interstitial lung disease. People had scarring of their lungs because senescent cells, you've heard of senescent cells, cause aging in many normal tissues, but also in liver failure, cirrhosis, in interstitial lung disease. They secrete the cytokines that pull in the scar tissue that cause organ failure. My contribution was, hey, I've just tested pancreatic cancer and found BCL-XL is crucial for resisting chemotherapy. Let's try this for cancer. That was my contribution. They already had the drug. My contribution was, let's use it for cancer. And so I helped show that it was effective for cancer. I want to stress 3 areas that this drug is going to be really important in, and we will do clinical trials in all of these areas. DT-2216 is very effective against T-cell ALL. T-cells require BCL-XL to survive thymic selection. What's that? Well, in the thymus, as you're an adolescent, your thymus stops autoreactive T-cells that would cause autoimmune disease like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. And so the ones that don't react to your self-tissue antigens express BCL-XL to get through the thymus. T-cell malignancies re-express BCL-XL as part of their transformation process. So if you can block BCL-XL, T-cell ALL, T-cell lymphomas will die. So, and we show that in the data here without reducing platelets. So on the upper left-hand graph, you'll see that DT-2216 does not drop platelets like the failed navitoclast drug. And then on the next figure over, it maintains tumor volume. You can see the tumors dissected below. In the mice, the tumors don't grow. These are about the size as they started being treated with DT-2216. And then you'll see that DT-2216 in the lower right-hand Western blot degrades the BCL-XL protein without harming any other proteins. The next cancer we're very interested in is pancreatic cancer. So as you know, it's one of the most fatal malignancies. Chemotherapy will delay its progression for a few months, but everyone dies once they have unresectable disease. And so we were able to show that DT-2216 reverses resistance to gemcitabine. And so on the lower left-hand graph of a tumor in a mouse, you'll see that gemcitabine plus DT-2216, the tumors didn't grow. The figure D is actually a human tumor called a patient-derived xenograft in an immunocompromised mouse. And they're very resistant tumors, and it doubled the survival of that mouse bearing this patient-derived xenografted tumor. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see that basically it killed all the tumor, just what's left is fibrous tissue. So DT-2216 reverses chemotherapy resistance. Next slide. So fibrolamellar hepatocellular carcinoma is a very rare but always fatal pediatric liver cancer. Why is it fatal? Because it grows, well, Dr. Patel is probably taking care of children with fibrolamellar hepatocellular carcinoma. The reason it's fatal is it really grows slowly. So most commonly it's first recognized after it's spread into the biliary tree or into the pancreas. So only the minority of children are cured, and they're only cured with surgery. Once it's spread, it's incurable, and there's no chemotherapy that works. They've tried everything. There's only about 1,000 cases in the United States, but a scientist at Memorial Sloan Kettering, whose daughter had fibrolamellar hepatocellular carcinoma and actually lived because of surgical resection, was successful, and she's working in his lab, discovered that they require BCL-XL to survive, and that's this graph on the left. So he contacted us after our paper came out in Nature Medicine on DT-2216. And so he had found that fibrolamellar carcinoma requires BCL-XL. That's shown here in that it's highly expressed and required. And then he also, when we gave him drug, found that it could degrade BCL-XL in these cancer cells. And then he had what's another patient-derived xenograft of an aggressive tumor, in which he showed that adding DT-2216 to a chemotherapy that gives them a few months, but then they all ultimately relapse and die, was able to completely abrogate any tumor. The FDA has made a big effort in pushing new drugs for pediatric oncology because there's not many new drugs. And they actually provide a waiver of $120 million, which would really help our company should we go there. So this is a trial we'll do with the Children's Oncology Group. The GI subcommittee has already approved this, and Memorial Sloan Kettering will be the lead site. So this will be one of our first phase 2 trials. This is unpublished, but has been presented at national meetings before, so it's okay that this is a public meeting. I want to talk briefly about Dialectic. Dialectic has received both a Seed Company Award and a Texas Company Award. And so these were the aims of the $3 million Seed Company grant that we wrote. And it had the 4 aims that we were able to synthesize it in a large scale and under what's called good manufacturing practice conditions. Those are very pure conditions that the FDA requires. And it's not orally bioavailable because it's too big, and it's really lipid soluble. So we had to formulate it as a lipid nanoparticle. That took us a year and $1 million. But in this synthesis is very complicated. It's 37 steps, but we got it down to 32 steps as part of this support. And then we did the pharmacokinetics and metabolism excretion. It has a long half-life, 6 to 12 hours, and it distributes to all tissues but the CNS. There's 3 liver metabolites, but they're not toxic. So we completed the synthesis under GMP conditions in the formulation, and we went on to good laboratory practice toxicity studies in both a rat and a dog. Interestingly, the dog does drop their platelets. The rat doesn't, and humans don't. But the dog has VHL in their platelets. So remember, that was what we used to degrade BCL-XL. And so we were a little taken aback by that. But the FDA said, fine, just start at a low dose in humans. And so we wrote the FDA IND submission, and we received approval last year in February. Next slide, please. So when we got the IND, we applied for a Texas company grant. Now, we've also raised a fair amount of capital, mainly almost all private equity from Texas, all from Texas. Again, this is a Texas company, Texas roots, Texas venture capital. We have not lost control to Boston or San Diego venture capital. That's very important here. CPRIT cannot support companies that are going to lose control to outside Texas entities. But we wrote and received the one Texas company award that CPRIT gave a year ago, and there were two aims there, and that was to complete the phase 1 safety and dose finding trial, and that is ongoing now at 3 sites, our Mays Cancer Center at UT Health San Antonio Northwestern, and then a cancer hospital in Dallas called Mary Crowley. And we're currently on our 4th dose level. 6 patients are accrued because we're a 3+3 trial algorithm, and we had 1 patient that dropped their platelets. But thus far, the other 5 patients have not, and so we'll probably go up to dose level 5. Current PK, pharmacokinetics say we can get a dose 50-fold higher than the concentrations we know are required for tumor efficacy based on our rat and mouse studies. We've also shown that we can pull the white blood cells out of patients and degrade the target efficiently. So we have on-target degradation of BCL-XL in leukocytes. And why is that important? Because our next clinical trial is T-cell lymphoma. And again, we've chosen that because we can use DT-2216 as a single agent. The other trials will all require another agent, and the FDA may require us to use 2 arms. But our quickest way to FDA approval will be a single-arm trial with overall response rate. That's what they've approved the other T-cell lymphoma drugs for, and they're terrible drugs, 35% response rate. So we think, we're meeting with the FDA this summer about this. We are asking for this trial to be not only a phase 2 efficacy, but also a registration trial. Because for the same number of patients, they've approved other drugs for T-cell lymphoma. And so we're going to have 2 shots on goal here because we're going to do what's called BH3 profiling. That is where we pull out a piece of the cancer, dump a small chemical on it to see if it requires BCL-XL for survival. And that's called BH3 profiling. BH3 is a class of amino acids that bind to the same pocket we target with DT-2016 on BCL-XL. And that's the plan. We've already, actually this morning driving down, I was on the phone with our CRO planning this trial. So we're almost done with phase 1. We should be done with phase 1 this year. Within a year of getting the Texas Company Award, we'll have completed dose finding. And then we'll start the phase 2 efficacy trial. So next slide, please. What I've hoped I've illustrated in our short time together has been that each CPRIT grant builds on the others. And I really support a balance. I think CPRIT did it right the first time, which is, okay, you provide recruitment awards, and then those faculty can come in and they can use CPRIT-supported cores to gain new data, to write new CPRIT academic research awards. This leads to new products and new Texas companies for seed awards, and then if they progress, Texas Company Awards. And the goal of CPRIT, and all of us, actually, CPRIT's mission statement is in our mission statement for the Mays Cancer Center, exactly the same, decrease the burden of cancer in Texas. That's our mission statement for the Mays Cancer Center as well. So my point is that CPRIT recruitment and academic awards leads to new products, which leads to companies. But CPRIT, I have a few suggestions. And so that's the next slide. So, and I know this is an ongoing discussion among the board, and I appreciate the constant drive to improve. Self-assessment and self-improvement is the key to increased productivity. For me too, and for our institution as well. So I'm for suggestions, because I don't know all the contingencies you work under, all the pressures you work under, all the finances, all the political pressures you work under. But I wonder, I'm pretty confident that all of our recruits would have come for less money. And so could you give more recruitment awards, but give less money? And so, and there's another key component you may already started this, but permit rollover of funds, because COVID the moving year, setting up your lab, it's really hard to spend all the funds in the allotted time. So I would permit, with a written rationale, permit rollover of funds. Supplies and equipment are often backordered. It's hard to hire personnel now. The Great Resignation, people retired during COVID, and for us too. So starting a lab is slow, expanding is slow. Supplies are often backordered. It took us a month to get a simple radioactive ATP, which used to be overnight. I'm very aware of the Valley of Death, and I'm sure you are too. What's that? That's when UT Health Science Center San Antonio Investigator actually even has a new compound, and it's unique. It's composition of matter intellectual property. That's key. It can't be in the chemical space previously. They have to have composition of matter. But they can't get that to a phase 1. That's the Valley of Death. So getting it through good manufacturing practice, synthesis, formulation, manufacturing to scale, and then the 2 animal toxicity and good laboratory practice, GLP tox. That's expensive. Now, we are more expensive than normal. Usually $3 million can get you there, but we were 5. We raised, we got $3 million from CPRIT, and we raised 4, and I'll come to that in just a minute. But not everybody's lucky to have wealthy friends like I do. And it's hard. I just worry that there's some great compound sitting on the shelf at the College of Pharmacy here at UT Austin that could cure lupus, and we'll never see it. So how many great compounds have never seen the light of day? And I actually can tell you horror stories about great compounds sitting on the shelves of pharmaceutical companies. My father had chronic myeloid leukemia, and he's alive to this day, 25 years later, because he went on imatinib. Well, imatinib was sitting on Novartis' shelf until Brian Drucker, a friend of mine, actually a close friend of Michelle's, Dr. LeBeau's, said, wait a minute, this blocks the Abl kinase, and CML requires the Abl kinase. And so he pulled it off the shelf and rescued the drug. How many other drugs like that? We don't even know about. And so it's the Valley of Death that prevents that from happening. Next, Texas is not a biotech hotbed. It should be, because the brain power is here. And I think you're the key, or I think CPRIT's the key. And so I participated in one Innovate Day. What's that? University of Florida is a massive commercialization program. Of course, the grandmother of all tech transfers. Gatorade came from the department I ran at University of Florida with Bob Cade. And it's a great story. The formula is long gone, but they still hold the copyright on the name. And that's where they get all the royalties from, is the name. But can CPRIT amplify that by holding a VC day of their best? You probably have 500 grantees, but then you do this well. You put together a really good commercialization panel. When I was interviewed by your commercialization panel, they nailed it. Now, I'd done another drug I started Abferral, so I knew most of the process, and I was able to answer all of their questions. And we had a really good team. We'd hired a great CEO, a great COO, a great CFO, a great chief legal counsel. We had an IP attorney in-house. Interestingly, these are all Texans who are retired, but just are bored and want to help. So they're working full-time for us, for equity. And so Texans have a generous heart. And you can call on retired Texans to do amazing things on a VC day like this. And then finally, we raised way more than the required match for our seed company grant, but we spent it. So our third year, when we were just at the last throes of our R&D, we didn't have 50% match in the bank. So by even though we had more than exceeded the match at the beginning, if you say you have to have 50% match that last year, then you decrease the incentive to spend the money and make progress in the first 2 years. So we actually took personal loans from all of us to put money in the bank. So the 4 founders wrote $100,000 checks to make the match. I don't actually this thing was more than 100,000, but to make the match. But because we didn't want to waste time. So CPRIT is a perverse incentive by having that. You're disincentivizing progress by having that match. And then, the match is important. I think you need a match. But the match also means that it's the people with the best connections that get funded. And so again, how many great drugs are there sitting on a shelf in the College of Pharmacy at UT Austin that will never see the light of day because they don't have the funds to get through the valley of death? Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd be happy to take a few minutes of questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramos. It's a wonderful presentation, and I'm glad Texas has you and CPRIT has partly helping you. I'm sure we will endeavor to make sure your dreams come true, particularly in San Antonio, since I'm a little partial to San Antonio. I should say that. The government office.
If Dialectic does get this approved, the board has promised a building, a drug development institute in San Antonio. And I've talked to the mayor and the judge about, city and county incentives to create a drug development enterprise in San Antonio. Because remember, San Antonio has not just UTSA, they have Southwest Research Institute, which can do the GMP chemical synthesis. They have Texas Biomed, which can do the GLP tox. So we have all the steps right here in San Antonio. And there's no other city in Texas that has all of those elements. Bigger cities, more powerful research institutions, but they don't have all of those steps in their process. And so I really think that we can serve as a model for all of Texas.
Thank you. Any questions? Dr. Rosen.
Thank you, Dean. I really appreciated the discussion. I have a comment and a question. The comment is I was a bit disappointed you called flow cytometry an ancient technology. It aged me about 50 years when you said that, so think about that. The other had to do with your talk about dialectic and the drug development. And I was thinking about Texas developing a biotech ecosystem rather than just companies.
Yes, sir.
And my question is, when you went to do GMP synthesis and toxicology, were those studies done in Texas? Had the facilities to do that in Texas, or did you have to go out of the state to get those studies done?
Oh, thank you so much. My voice is getting hoarse. My wife said that's because I talk too much. So we did it both. So the synthesis was very complicated, and we actually did that in Chicago. We helped with the formulation, and then the animal studies were actually done in India and China. So it was a multidisciplinary, multi-center effort. The reason it was because that 37-step synthesis, we had 3 HPLC purification steps. We had to get that down as much as possible because it's just so expensive to make it. So we've made a kilogram of drug in 32 steps with 1 purification step that the FDA has accepted. But we could have done it here, because right here in San Antonio, we could have done it all in San Antonio. They're more expensive. And again, we had limited funds. But I think if we could create where everybody shares in the equity, if Southwest Research Institute and Texas Biomed had a little piece of equity that, they got a return on investment, they give us a break on our price. I've spoken to both directors about this concept, that we could create a drug development consortium where they could match the price of the ITRI in Chicago or Anthem in India, or Bioduro in China, then we could do everything right here. So we did a little bit here, I'd say a third, and the rest was out of the state. But we could have done it all here.
Well, great, because it'd be great to develop the biosystem so the money CPRIT and therefore the taxpayers provide stays in the state and we get the multiplier effect.
Exactly. Well, the clinical trials are, 2 of the 3 sites are here in Texas. The company's headquarters are here in Texas. Every employee is here in Texas, and the research is here in Texas. So I would say 2/3 of the effort is here in Texas. The things we farmed out. So the formulation was very tricky. So in fact, we weren't even sure. We were risking a lot of our own time and money on the formulation. It's a big, complex molecule that precipitates. It doesn't do well in plasma. It's so lipophilic, it just forms fat globules. So we had to make it in a lipid nanoparticle. That was very tricky. And that was something that SWARI, Southwest Research Institute, probably didn't have. And there's probably only one place in the country to go to, and that was ITRI in Chicago. And they did it. It took them a year and $1 million, as I said, but they did it, and the FDA accepted it. And these are very and it probably worked better because these lipid nanoparticles are probably preferentially taken up by cancer cells. But valid point, and we have it all in San Antonio, and I would love to create kind of a virtuous circle where, a target leads to a drug, leads to toxicity studies, leads to funding for new targets.
We're on the same page. Thanks for presenting.
Thank you.
You, Dr. Rice?
I wanted to say, first of all, as an alumnus of the medical school in San Antonio, I'm quite proud of the work that's done there, and it's a thrilling story. So thank you so much for bringing it to us today. And
Thank you, Dr.
Maybe I could shamelessly turn that into an invitation to come some say hello sometime down there.
Love to have you.
I did have one question, just probably too much in the weeds, but just for 30 seconds. The pancreatic cancer, gemcitabine, I think, refractory, you give your drug, and that helps it. Does that drug work best when it's after the resistance has kind of come forth, or is it something you would try at the same time or earlier? How does that work? How do you think about that?
It would work up front, too. The gemcitabine works for about 6 months, as most of you know, and then every pancreatic cancer case will relapse. And they relapse because they overexpress BCL-XL. But not every pancreatic cancer cell, I would say more than half of them use BCL-XL for resistance. And when you knock out BCL-XL genetically or pharmacologically, it makes them sensitive to any number of pancreatic cancer cell drugs. But up front, it's even more effective. So we don't know if it's going to be curable at the back end. We just know that you can restore response in our animal models. But your point is well taken. Maybe even more effective up front.
Is it harder to get FDA to approve it if it's a new thing to say it's you've got this existing therapy, go with that and try it as an after? And so that's kind of the problem of.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
And the FDA frowns on upfront trials unless there's really good evidence it's going to work. However, there's a way you could do this in a trial where you take gemcitabine failures and do a single arm and say now they're responsive. So everybody that failed on gemcitabine, you accrue them to our trial, add DT-2216. Now they respond. Any response rate in a gemcitabine failure would count towards FDA approval. So what we're hoping for in that trial will be that the FDA will allow us to do a single-arm trial, approximately 200 patients, and just so we can restore response rates. And why is response rates important? I know the FDA will require us to do a survival study at the back end, but we might be able to get approval on response rates. That's so-called accelerated approval. We've already been granted that in T-cell lymphoma. So orphan drug designation and accelerated approval have already been granted for T-cell lymphoma. We hope that for fibrolamellar and for pancreatic will also be granted accelerated approval so that we can do response rates instead of waiting 5 years to see whether they survive or not. A response rate is an upfront measurement, and so the FDA approval will be much faster.
Super exciting. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Dr. Hernandez?
Yes. Good morning. It's nice meeting you in the elevator, first and foremost.
Thank you for getting me here.
Yes, absolutely. Full disclosure, I used to do BCL signal transduction research back when flow cytometry was popular, so I agree with you. Don't go
You
there.
look way too young.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
you're a
you.
young guy.
That's right. So you said prostate cancer. What percentage of your prostate cancers that you're seeing have this? Is this like it binds to the receptor, then it goes through the cell, then it activates it by binding it again, making it active, so it's organically taken care of, and then it's the ligase that gets recycled.
So
Internally?
that's two different things. So
Okay.
we will use a PROTAC to target the androgen receptor ERG dimer that turns on the cancer genes in prostate cancer.
Yes,
Almost
sir.
every prostate cancer has that. So as you know, almost every prostate cancer is sensitive to testosterone deprivation. That testosterone binds the androgen receptor, but when ERG is around, it creates different genes turned on. And so it's the androgen receptor testosterone. That's normal for all prostates, just like estrogen and estrogen receptor in breast. Normal breast is important for turning on the normal breast genes. It's when ERG is around, it's an oncoprotein, binds the androgen receptor, turns on the wrong genes, and that causes prostate cancer.
Right.
And ERG can be turned on by any number of mechanisms I won't go into here. But if you can block that interaction or degrade one or both, then you can block the survival of prostate cancer. Also be great preventative. Those people whose PSAs is going up,
Right.
you could give it as a prevention. But those are two different things.
Okay.
That we are now using the UT Austin supercomputer to model that structure and say, okay, what kind of chemical would block that interaction? And then we could add a degradatory E3 ligase to that.
Got it. On one of your slides, when you geographically said South Texas, what is South Texas to you? What does
San
that
Antonio and south.
Got it.
We have 30 counties south of us. It's a defined NCI catchment area.
Okay.
And so it's an area the size of Pennsylvania with the population of Minnesota. And it has one cancer center.
That's right.
It's 5.5 million people there, 55% Hispanic, and increased incidence of cancer.
Does that catch El Paso as well, or does it go that far?
We don't go.
Okay.
We go about 2/3 of the way to El Paso. We go to the valley.
Yes, sir.
So
you
we
do.
get a lot of patients from Harlingen and McAllen.
Now, you said some of the people who don't need flow cytometry anymore, they use these other instruments, and they go and be trained. Are they able then to go back, and do they have this type of equipment in their institutions so they can then utilize their training? Or
Yeah, so flow cytometry has gotten cheaper and cheaper. And you can get a desktop unit for
Right.
less than $100,000 now. And it can probably do everything you need to do in an individual
the
laboratory.
fusion cell sorter, the benchtop sorter, all that. I mean, I'm glad we have it, but are there institutions that you've dealt with, are they having problems acquiring this type of equipment?
They can. The NIH has a special program called S10 grants for buying instruments, especially in smaller institutions that are minority serving.
Right.
And so that's a great way to. The other thing is they can come up and use our instance. So UTSA, Texas State University, a lot of smaller institutions, University of Incarnate Word, Trinity, a lot of San Antonio institutions, New Braunfels, south of us. There's Laredo has the UT Health Outpost. They come up and use or send us samples, and we'll do it for them.
Great.
So we serve a much broader area than just our institute.
Right. On your slide 280, it shows the flow, your clinical trials for PROTAC. How long did it actually take you to get to a clinical trial?
5 years.
5 years.
$5 million, 5 years. It's
Okay.
a little bit long. I mean, I'd say the average is $3 million in 3 years. There's data on that, and I could probably find it, but we took longer because it was big, difficult to synthesize. It wasn't water soluble. We had to formulate it.
Yes,
So
sir.
those two things, synthesis and formulation, cost us 2 extra years and $2 extra million. But we did it.
Yes, sir.
And perseverance is really key.
Sure.
I can't tell you the uncounted weekend hours I put into this. I mean,
That's good.
I don't have a life. So
You have a wife.
I mean, I'm happily married, and
Yes.
my kids still love me. So,
We love you too.
but you know what? When you like what you do, it's not work.
That's right.
I think Dr. LeBeau is a great example of this. Her cheerfulness indicates the joy of work. And you're serving. How much are you getting paid?
We paid enough such that we have
Yeah.
time to listen to geniuses the other way around.
So, Dean, Memorial Sloan Kettering, you said they're be used as a site versus a site in Texas, or?
No, we'll use MD Anderson as well.
In addition.
And the T-cell lymphoma is rare. There's only 7,000 cases nationally. It's probably only, in Texas, probably only there's 20%.
1,400.
Yeah, very good. So there's not that many cases in the state of Texas. And so there's a T-cell lymphoma consortium, 14 institutions around the nation. It's led by Steve Horowitz at Memorial Sloan Kettering, who Dr. LeBeau and I know. He's probably the leading clinical trialist in T-cell lymphoma. He'll lead the trial. We're also going to go internationally, though, just to Europe and to South Korea and Australia. In fact, that's what the call was about. What are the countries, just to be able to get enough cases. We're going to avoid some areas of Asia for some difficulties. FDA has been skeptical of some data from certain countries.
And are you, sir, working with a pediatric trial in this, or Children's Hospital?
Well, Children's Oncology Group, runs most of the pediatric cancer trials. They have a GI subcommittee.
Yes.
That GI subcommittee voted to accept this as their lead trial in liver cancer. and they're run out of Dana-Farber, but the lead will be Mike Ortiz. Again, he's at Sloan Kettering. He'll be the PI on this trial, but it will be a Children's Oncology GI subcommittee trial, official trial. In fact, they just voted to approve it about 10 days ago. They just signed a CDA with us. So we're going full speed ahead because there's nothing for these kids. They're all dead.
Right.
And there's not many cases, again, 1,000 cases. There's a very active fibrolamellar society. So those 2,000 parents of these 1,000 kids, they are extremely politically active, extremely vocal, and put their money where their mouth is. And so they're extremely excited about this. This is the first hope in this disease ever.
Yes.
And we feel like we have a moral obligation to, even though we're going to be a financial disaster for us, because to develop a drug for 1,000 patients a year is just going to be really hard. But we have a moral obligation to those kids.
You do, yes. On your comments when you made to improve CPRIT, you should know that one of your biggest allies is the gentleman behind you, Mr. Wayne. Wayne, he's
I'm Wayne. I'm talking.
And the board, because we understand. So it's good insight to know that some of these grants are a little too big, and if we break them up, it might be more recruits. And you're right. It's hard to spend money when our supply chain is the way it is, and then hold you to it within a year. And but at the same time, I think it's fair to say that if you don't use it, also, right? I mean, it's kind of hard for you to come back, in my opinion, to reapply for something. You haven't even used the first round of monies, and you're asking for more. You need to be fair with the state of Texas, with other institutions. And we also agree with you that, at least I do and some of my colleagues, that we can be an economic center as well. We can drive jobs. We can drive innovation, healthcare, all at once. And I don't have a problem at all in making sure that the cities, counties, wherever you're going, that they understand that you bring something unique that's going to help everybody around the world, but specifically to them in their backyard. And they should be involved. They should be courted as cities, and for EDCs or counties, they should be courted, and they should be involved and help companies like yourself really take off. And if we can help, I'm of the opinion that we should. Because right letter support, whatever we have to do to be sure that you guys grow in Texas, stay in Texas, and deliver for Texas.
Well, we'll stay in Texas. All the board is in Texas, and my great-grandfather was a Methodist preacher in Houston. So, I'm my mom's family's. I grew up in L.A. because she married and moved, but I'm a Texan, and I'll be here the rest of my career.
Thank you, Dr. Ramos.
Thank you.
I appreciate this very much so.
You bet.
You've ignited a lot of passion. And your wife is right too, by the way. Mr. Roberts will provide the Chief Executive's Officer's report. I'm sure there won't be a lot of questions there.
Wasn't that great? Thank you, Dr. Patel. Today's awards, if you approve the recommendations, will be the last ones from fiscal year 2022 appropriations. With the approval of the 21 awards recommended at $89.3 million, we will close out FY 2022 awards with a $3.5 million balance, which is pretty tight. And of course, the interest in having a special meeting in September in order to address some possible recommendations that we could not squeeze into this fiscal year. As you know, one of the things I really like to do is to introduce new staff to you. And I'm very happy today that we've got 4 new ones to introduce to you. All of them are key and in no particular order. And when I call out your name, if you'll stand up and wave so that they can see a face with you. Tina Molander. Adela Sines. Sharanya Vadiala. Hopefully I got that correct. And also, I hope I get this one correct. Soma Imanike. Did I get close? Yes. And with respect to Soma, he is going to be based out of Lubbock. He comes to us by way of the Texas Tech Health Sciences Center there, and he is the new information security officer. So we have been waiting to get him on board. Sharanya is the new program statistician. Tina has worked for us as a contract employee, but now is becoming a permanent employee with us. And Adela joined the team just a month ago about. So I'm very excited to have these key personnel on board. Now y'all can get back to work. As you know, there will be a special oversight committee that will be video conferenced at 9 o'clock on September the 14th. As I said, it will be video conferenced. Either Dr. Patel or Dr. Rice. I think Dr. Patel is verifying his availability. We do have to have somebody physically here in Austin, but if Dr. Patel is unable to do it, Dr. Rice, we sure would appreciate you driving down Congress to work with us. I'm also hoping that we will need a special oversight committee meeting mid to late January in order to consider Texas Regional Excellence in Cancer Awards. These are the TREC awards that there is considerable interest around the state of getting CPRIT awards more geographically dispersed, and if at all possible, if they pass muster, to be able to announce these as the legislature is getting going. With that, Dr. Patel, that concludes. I'll try and answer any questions you folks may have. I cannot beat that grantee presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Are there any questions for Mr. Roberts? Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. The chair recognizes Mr. Burgess to present the Chief Compliance Officer's report in his usual scintillating way.
This is a setup. You'll find my compliance program update behind tab 4 in your booklet. I will highlight just a few areas in the report. Grantee reporting, we had 23 delinquent reports at the end of July. As you are aware, that's below our threshold, our self-imposed threshold of 5%, which would be 28 reports. So we do meet weekly as a staff to talk about delinquency and how we can work with grantees to make sure they submit those on time. If you'll switch over to 4-2, we review as a compliance team, we perform a second level review of all financial status reports. And for the last 3 months, we did a little over 460 of those reviews, 9% requiring resubmission. So we look at those, we work with the grant accountant, work with the grantee to make sure they submit, again, the appropriate documentation. In the last 3 months, we completed 25 enhanced desk reviews, 8 virtual on-site reviews. And I'm going to land the plane here in just a second. 4-3, match expenditure reviews. You're familiar with our requirement for academic research and product development research grantees to have match for their grant. And we perform reviews of those expenditures. And as we are ending FY22, we've reviewed about $10 million worth of expenditures, and roughly $170,000 we've found in unallowable expenses that have been claimed for that. So again, we work with the grantee to remediate that. Training and support opportunities over the last 3 months. We had 1 new grantee training for Texas Health Institute, new authorized signing official training, and then we had our second series of compliance trainings in June. About 100 grantee staff attended those trainings, and we have a third series and tentatively scheduled for October. And on 4-4, if you flip over, we are in the process of finalizing our FY23 grantee risk assessment. That's not to be confused with our internal audit risk assessment. That's completed. The risk assessment really is an objective measure for us to that we use to determine monitoring needs for our grantees for the upcoming year, any training needs, et cetera. So after this meeting, we take the awards that were awarded today or approved today, and we incorporate those into the assessment, and we finalize that. So that's my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions, Ms. Burgess?
Just one.
Please.
I was just going to call out, first of all, thank you for the report. I was going to call out that 170,000 out of about 10 million is 1.7%. So that seemed like a very good number, appreciating zero is the goal, but for the matching funds that didn't perfectly match and you had to ask for corrections or fine tuning, that seemed like a great number. Do you think that's because of the training you've been doing over the last couple of years?
Yes. Yeah, I believe so. I do. I think that we catch them at the beginning with new grantee training. We catch them annually. We have ad hoc trainings when we identify issues. We work closely with program staff. If grantees being non-responsive, we're kind of working with them at all angles. So I hope that is a reason. I believe so.
It seems like it's a good number.
Thank you.
Dr. Hernandez.
I just want to refresh my memory. When it comes to this matching, did we not discuss the fact that the private institutions, the nonprofits, was this going to apply to them also, or it's only to higher ed, that they can use their indirect costs as their match?
Correct.
It's only higher.
It's only.
It's only higher ed that can use their indirect cost.
Right. Yeah. I thought the board had talked about we were going to be looking at, because I think was it a Methodist or somebody?
Yes, there are some research institutes, and Kristen, I know, will correct me if I'm wrong. There was a bill introduced last session that would address the issue of, say, Methodist Research Institute that are not defined as Texas institutions of higher education, and that bill did not get out of committee,
Got it. All right, thank you.
unfortunately.
Thank you. Turning to the certification of the award slates that we will consider today, Mr. Burgess will provide the compliance certification report for the recruitment awards, prevention awards, and product development research awards presented today.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. My certification is in your proposed grant award booklet on page 73. And in my certification, I detail the process of reviewing each piece of documentation that is provided to us, and along with the pedigrees, and they were provided to you as well in the portal. So I also attended the PIC meeting on August the 3rd and verified that process complied with CPRIT's rules. Again, I've reviewed all the supporting documentation, and I certify that the awards that are for your consideration today met all of CPRIT's laws and administrative rules. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, Ms. Burgess? I just would like to thank you and your team for ensuring that we have accountability and transparency and truthfulness. We appreciate that greatly.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Patel, if I could add a comment largely following up on Dr. Rice. Dr. Rice and Dr. Rosenfeld, of course, were here from the reset going back to 2013. And y'all will recall that we had a lot of compliance issues that we did not understand. We worked through those. We retained Vince and worked through those. And we like to have this compliance report up front at these meetings to stress our belief in the importance of the compliance program with respect to the agency. We think it's a critical part of what we do to retain trust. So thank you, Vince.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Chair recognizes Dr. LeBeau to provide the Academic Research Program update and introduces the Program Integration Committee's grant award recommendations. Dr. LeBeau.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. Let me begin by referring you to your academic research program update in the Oversight Committee meeting book. And in particular, if you look on tab 5 on pages 5.1, you'll see the description of the awards for fiscal year 22.2 cycle that were reviewed in May. And just to remind you that we will bring those to the Oversight Committee in September. And on the following page in Table 2, on page 5.2, it will show you the distribution of the individual investigator research awards that will be reviewed in October, and we will bring these to the Oversight Committee in February. The TREC awards that will be reviewed in late November and will be brought to the Oversight Committee in January, as you heard from Mr. Roberts. So we'll now turn to the proposed grant awards book. And if you go to page 6, the Scientific Review Council and the Program Integration Committee recommendations for FY22 recruitment cycles 22.9 and 2210 include 3 awards from 2 grant mechanisms totaling $10 million, as displayed in Table 1. The recommendations include 1 award for an established investigator application from cycle 22.9 and 2 awards from cycle 22.10 for recruitment of first-time tenure-track faculty members for a total funding request of $10 million. In the next slide on Table 2, and that is also on page 6 of your book, you'll see the program priorities that are addressed by these grant recommendations. All 3 address the recruitment of outstanding cancer researchers to Texas, and 1 addresses the recruitment of childhood and adolescent cancers. Okay, if you can go to the next slide. And can you go to the presentation view? The first recommendation is a nominee put forward by UTMD Anderson Cancer Center, Dr. Ziguo Zhang, and he is being recommended for a Recruitment of Established Investigator Award. Dr. Zhang is currently a professor at Columbia University, and he is world-renowned for his discoveries that relate to understanding the molecular mechanisms by which epigenetic changes lead to the development of pediatric gliomas and other human cancers. And just to remind you, epigenetic alterations to DNA, RNA, and structural proteins play a causal role in tumorigenesis, tumor evolution, and drug resistance. Dr. Zhang focuses on epigenetic changes that occur that alter the DNA and the structural proteins that make up chromatin. In particular, his work has been very important in understanding the role that mutations in the histones play in the pathogenesis of diffuse intrinsic pontine gliomas in children. One of the major unresolved questions in modern biology is how these epigenetic changes are propagated to daughter cells when the cell divides, and how this can be maintained to ensure genomic integrity and cell identity. And Dr. Zhang's work is focusing on elucidating the molecular mechanisms of epigenetic inheritance in both normal cells and in cancer cells, and using this information to discover the mechanisms that underlie the formation of gliomas and to identify novel drug targets and therapeutics for pediatric brain tumors. I'll move to the next 2 recruits, which are first-time tenure-track faculty member nominees. The first is Dr. Stephen Boynemus, and he is being recruited to Baylor College of Medicine and appointment as an assistant professor in the Department of Molecular and Human Genetics. Dr. Boynemus is a very talented scientist who focuses on a unique cellular structure called the biomolecular condensates. And these are membraneless assemblies of protein and nucleic acids that occur within the cytoplasm of cells. And it won't surprise you to know that they are disrupted in cancer and in other disease states, as well as during aging. In his prior work, he demonstrated how these condensates actually allow cells to sense and respond to diverse intrinsic and extrinsic senses. Stresses. So what he's proposing to do now is to untangle how these biomolecular condensates act during stress signaling to allow the cells in the tumor microenvironment that surround tumor cells to become resilient to the stress. And he's working on brain tumors. And he will use a variety of very innovative synthetic biology tools and proteomic methods. Now, as you can imagine, the ability of a cell to cope with stress, including cancer therapies, is an Achilles heel. And he is interested in exploring these vulnerabilities within this stress response pathways to develop novel therapies for brain tumors. The last nominee is Dr. Siki Liu, who is nominated by UT Southwestern University and appointment as an assistant professor in the Department of Pharmacology. Now, she has a really exceptional background in studying skin wound repair and how the skin cells signal through an innate immune signaling system to provide the first defense against infections and pathogens, but also to mediate the repair process. She has discovered that, and I should backtrack and say that she is studying cutaneous squamous cell carcinomas, and that it's known that chronic wounds and burns are a major risk factor for the development of squamous cell carcinoma in the skin. And she's discovered that the squamous cells in the skin use a novel innate immune pathway that sense and coordinate wound repair. And it's significantly upregulated in almost all skin cancers. And what she has found is that these skin cancers actually manage to hijack this innate immune signaling pathway and use it to evade the normal repair process and to fuel their growth. And she's using these insights to understand this mechanism of pathogenesis, but also to develop novel targeted therapeutic strategies. And I mentioned that she's a very accomplished investigator, but I should also mention that she is the recipient of a prestigious Pathway to Independence NIH K99R00 Early Investigator Award. So that concludes the description of the three nominees.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. LeBeau? Thank you, Dr. LeBeau. Mr. Burgess has certified compliance for the recruitment award process. It is my understanding that no Oversight Committee member has reported a conflict with any award recommendations presented today. Are there conflicts of interest that members have not already reported? Hearing none. Members, you have the list of applications and grant amounts recommended by the PIC for the Academic Research Grant Awards. We will approve the PIC's recommendations if 2/3 of the Oversight Committee members agree. There are two separate award slates constituting 3 grant recommendations. Rather than take a separate vote on each grant mechanism, I will ask for a vote to approve all the recommended awards. If a member wants to consider one or more awards recommendations separately from the vote on all the awards, please make a motion to do so now. Now, mind you, I would have got everything short by just saying, say yes or no. But I will now entertain a motion to approve the PIC's recommendations for the following mechanisms: recruitment of first-time tenure-track faculty members and recruitment of established investigators.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Hearing approval from at least 2/3 of the members, the motion carries. I will entertain a motion delegating contract negotiation authority to the CEO, CPRIT staff, and to authorize the CEO to sign the contracts on behalf of CPRIT.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. The Chair recognizes Ms. Majid to provide the Chief Prevention Officer's report and present the PICS Prevention Award recommendations. Ms. Ramona.
Good morning, members. You'll find the prevention program update behind tab 6 of your booklets, and it is a brief update. The first part lists the applications that we received for the awards that you'll be considering today. And then for FY 2023, Cycle 1, the applications are, cycle closes August 31st, and peer review is scheduled for December. And then those recommendations will be brought to you in February. And the response to the new request for application is looking fairly strong this cycle. We've had an increased number of starts, the majority of which are for the primary prevention of cancer RFA that it was new for this cycle. So we'll know more in a few weeks. I wanted to bring that to your attention. The award recommendations can be found on page 23 of the proposed grant awards booklet. And there, the PIC is recommending 9 projects for a little over $14.4 million for your consideration today. And this includes 1 project from this first cycle of the fiscal year. All of the 9 projects address the 3 major program priorities related to cancer prevention. There is 1 priority that is specifically addresses the program assessment. But they all address all of the prioritization of populations in geographic areas for this cycle. I'll give a brief overview of the projects, beginning with the 5 from the evidence-based cancer prevention services mechanism, and then move on to the 4 from the expansion of services mechanism. The first project from the University of Houston focuses on increasing HPV vaccination among young adults in 12 clinics in 7 counties in Central and Southeast Texas. The University of Texas of Austin has 2 projects in this slate. One is for inpatient screening and treatment for both unhealthy alcohol use and tobacco use as a means of cancer prevention. And this builds on the successful outpatient model that currently is in use. The other one is a nurse-delivered survivorship care program in several rural counties in Northeast Texas, and it focuses on the preventive and psychosocial health needs of cancer survivors. FIT testing for colorectal cancer for residents of the South Plains region is the focus of the project from Texas Tech University Health Science Center. And this program will use the networks and collaborations and lessons learned from their very successful CPRIT-funded breast and cervical cancer screening program that's been going on for multiple years. Likewise, the University of Texas Health Center at Tyler will use an integrated public health and clinical model that is currently being used in their colorectal cancer screening program to establish a breast cancer screening program in 7 counties in East Texas, where breast cancer mortality is higher than the state average in this region. Moving on to the expansion mechanism, it includes 4 recommended awards. The next one is the UT Tyler's expansion project that I referred to just now. This project will address colorectal cancer screening, working with both federally qualified health centers as well as local health departments to increase the screening numbers. And they will be operational in 36 counties in East Texas. This region of Texas has some of the highest incidence and mortality rates in the state. The next project is an expansion of the tobacco prevention and HPV vaccination project from Baylor College of Medicine. This project will continue the work within Harris Health System, the safety net system, while expanding to additional safety net clinics and health systems. One very notable system, Legacy Community Health, operates 15 community and 35 school-based clinics serving pediatric patients. So there will be a lot of patients being served with this grant. MD Anderson Cancer Center is seeking to expand their access to cervical cancer screening and treatment services. They will continue in the existing sites in the RGV and in Central and Northeast Texas, and then adding new sites in Southeast Texas. And this project builds capacity to deliver cervical cancer prevention using training. They teach colposcopy and LEAP training courses, and they use telementoring and teleconsulting with Project ECHO. That is specialists and providers come together, and providers from rural and underserved communities to ask questions and be trained through this Project ECHO, which stands for Extension for Community Healthcare Outcomes. The final project is from University Health System. This is the Safety Net Health System in Bexar County. They propose to expand their previously funded colorectal cancer screening program further into Bexar County, as well as expand to Maverick County, focusing mostly on low-income Hispanic individuals. And University Health has successfully implemented multiple CPRIT-funded projects, all of which have been incorporated into routine care throughout their safety system. So those are the 9 projects being recommended, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions?
I just have
All right.
one question. I was trying to figure out, I'm not familiar with the university's health system. What system is that?
It's the Safety Net Hospital in Bexar County.
Okay. Oh, I see. I see. Yeah, thank you.
That's the name of the
Thank you.
Safety Net.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
From above.
Yeah, excuse me. It's a little hard to know. It's a little hard to, strangely enough, it's hard for me to know when to talk. So, Ms. McKidd, I noticed that the last project, Defeat Breast Cancer, received a score of 5.0. That seems pretty low given the traditional, numbers that have been assigned. Any particular reason for that? I mean, is there something, what's going on with that application that it got a low score like that? Do you know?
Yes.
Just curious.
In fact, Dr. Patel asked this same question when he was sent the slate by Dr. Wyatt, who responded with the programmatic review. The prevention program has a unique review. The PRC is used to balance the portfolio, as well as to look at the type of cancer and the need in the state. And they also, in this case, looked at the previous projects of these two, the directors of the lower scoring or the higher scoring projects, and they've had tremendous success, been very successful, and they felt as a council that the need justified recommending the award, and all of the weaknesses that were pointed out were mostly smaller details that were lacking, and that they felt like these could be worked out prior to the implementation of the grant. I have a conference with each grantee prior to their award starting, where we discuss the goals and objectives and go over all the weaknesses, and they have a chance to address the weaknesses.
Okay, thank you. I should have known I'd be second to Dr. Patel.
For a moment, I thought you were divine, but not. There's a disembodied voice. Well, turning to the Prevention Award recommendations, Mr. Burgess has certified compliance of the Prevention Award process. It is my understanding that no members have reported any conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest not reported? Hearing none. Members, you have the list of applications and grant amounts recommended by the PIC for the Prevention Grant Awards. The Oversight Committee will approve the PIC's recommendations if 2/3 of the members agree. We will consider the slates together unless an Oversight Committee member wishes to take up any recommendations separately. I will entertain a motion to approve the PIC's recommendations for following mechanisms: expansion of cancer prevention services to rural and medically underserved populations, and evidence-based cancer prevention services.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Hearing approval from at least 2/3 of the members, the motion carries. I will entertain a motion delegating contract negotiation authority to the CEO and CPRIT staff and to authorize the CEO to sign the contracts on behalf of CPRIT.
So moved.
Second.
So moved.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to agenda item 10, I will recognize the Chief Product Development Officer, Dr. Ken Smith, to provide the Product Development Program update and introduce the PIC's Grant Award recommendations for product development research grants. Dr. Smith?
Morning.
Morning.
I'll give you a quick update. Get the slides up. Yeah, go to the first slide, please. So in this latest cycle, the 22 cycle 2, we had 3 RFAs. One was the Texas Company Product Development Research Awards, and we separate out the Company Relocation Product Development Research Awards, even though they're both $20 million, up to $20 million. And then finally, the Seed Awards, up to $3 million. So in this cycle, those are the RFAs. And 2023, they'll change slightly, so I'll go through that in a minute. This is a breakdown of the different companies, the applications we received, and this time is quite good. 34 applications were received. They're split almost in half between companies and seed companies. We broke out relocation companies. There were 8 of them, but together it was 18 and 16, so about a 50-50 split by mechanism. Next slide, please. So of those 34, 15 were allowed to present. They moved on to the next round. And then after that, 11 went through due diligence, and ultimately 9 were recommended by the PDRC and the PIC for receiving awards totaling about $64 million. Next, please. So for 2023, we've changed the RFAs slightly, and these RFAs hopefully will be out next week. Like I said, we collapsed relocation with Texas companies just to call it company awards. And we still have the seed award, which will remain pretty much the same, $3 million limit. But then we broke up the other RFAs into 3 different categories. One was therapeutic, the other device and diagnostics, and the fourth one, we call it new technologies. Some people, what do they say, emerging technologies or something. So, but the idea behind this is that we wanted to encourage companies that thought of CPRIT awards as only therapeutic awards, because that has predominated in the past. We wanted to encourage them to basically have their own RFA that they can feel like, okay, well, they're interested in diagnostics, they're interested in devices. And then the new technologies are like deep machine learning, manufacturing, could be different technologies that kind of were subsumed in the earlier RFAs but not spelled out. And so trying to get more applications in diverse areas. So one of the things that we've changed in the process going forward is, and this was at the request and the kind of information, and we solicited the opinions of the PDRC as well as the PDAC. And they thought that the process could be improved by having a preliminary application review process. And what this does, it does a couple things. One, in the past, it's not as though there wasn't a step in screening initially. We had a screening step, but it was a full application that everybody would have to fill out, which in most cases is between like 90 and 110 pages. And so this preliminary application review process will allow the companies, one, to apply at any point in time. So normally we'd have an application deadline. Now this is a continuous process, so they can do it whenever they want to apply. And it's a truncated application. So instead of having to do a full-blown 90, 100, 110-page application, it only requires 2 pages of an executive summary, 16-page slide or 16-slide slide deck, and then kind of a description of the goals, aims, and a rudimentary budget and timeline so that we can match whatever's in the executive summary to what's going on in the budget. And in this idea with the PDRC is that they said that they could basically go through these applications much more rapidly if in fact they were limited and we could do this quickly. So not only do you get to apply at any point in time, but you usually get feedback, or the hope is that we'll give them feedback within 3 to 5 weeks of filing the application. So that's huge for companies. They don't have to wait a long period of time. They haven't had to put in a ton of effort into the application. And then the process will still kind of remain the same after that. One of the things that'll make this easier for the PDRC to do is we have 3 new members of the PDRC who I'll introduce, at least on paper if they're not here. But that'll give us 12 members. And we've broken the 12 members into 3 panels of 4 members. They'll be able to review the preliminary applications as they come through. And that way we hope to get, an answer back to people in 3 to 5 weeks. And so what they'll have to do is it's just a single sheet. We have like 7 different boxes you can check as to what the normal rejections are, right? It's not part of CPRIT's bailiwick. It's you're not ready. You don't have enough company. We don't appreciate your management team. So there's about seven things that are there that are commonly used to reject some of the companies. So there'll be those 7 things, and then as well as a comment area if they want to give comments. Because we want to be consistent giving information back to the companies that get rejected. Now, the companies that don't get rejected obviously move on, and that application process is very similar to the previous one, which is quickly that, one, they do a full application and then are invited to do a presentation. And then beyond that, if they get past that hurdle, then they go to due diligence. One other final thing I'll mention about the process is that what we're able to do with this process is that once we get to the full application part of it, we're going to actually be able to pick panels. Now, they won't be pre-selected panels. We'll have panels that basically will select on the basis of what the application is about. So the hope in that case is to get real experts in each of the cases on each of the applications. And if we need to go outside our review panel, or if we get through the review panel, maybe the first part, we go to due diligence, we can bring in a third party, like we used to use ICON in the past, or perhaps other experts. The idea basically is we want to get as much expertise on a particular topic so that they'll get a fair review. So as I said, this kind of gives you just the dates. The first full application deadline is November 1st. And what we'll do basically, like I said, we'll have the 3 panels, and they'll rotate every 2 weeks as to which applications they get. They'll get both seed as well as company applications. The next 4 slides, just want to kind of condense. So because of the new process and because of the amount of expertise that we'd like to have on these panels, we're expanding the number of peer reviewers exponentially. We're trying to at least double it. We've had about 40 to 50 through GDIT. They normally supply us with our peer reviewers. But in this case, it's been very helpful. I don't know if anybody on this panel has recommended some. I believe several people have. Yeah, Dr. Rice. But also the PDAC and
Margot has recommended.
Yeah, sorry, and the PDRC. They all
Never forget D.
Sorry. I'll get you some scotch. So
We won't put that in the minutes.
it's just that every committee and panel has been very helpful in helping us recruit people, and it's been phenomenal. And I want to give Bria all the credit. She's really worked hard to work with the people who have been recommended to set up Zoom calls. We've talked to every one of the peer reviewers that we wanted to have in this process, and she's done a tremendous job. And the idea was to a couple things. One was to expand the number of people that we have to do reviews, and we wanted to change the mix of expertise a little bit. It's always been heavily weighted on the therapeutic side, which isn't a bad thing because a lot of the applications we get are therapeutic applications. But because we want to encourage device and diagnostics and AI and manufacturing and others, we feel like we needed to expand the reviewer pool and change or get additional expertise. One of the other things that we've done too is we've tried to add more VC, banking, something outside necessarily just the scientific expertise, which has always been, top notch. So, because that has a great deal to do. And I was always kind of impressed since I've been here or interested in, it's not just the scientific expertise, it's not just the science that's looked at with these companies. They look at the management team, they look at the possibility of actually getting return on the investment, even to the point where, you worry, so CPRIT gets them through the valley of death, but if they can't get any more funding, then you start to wonder, well, is this worthwhile? And all these things go into the review process. And so I was kind of surprised how detailed it is, even outside the scientific aspects of it. And I didn't think that most of the people would be attuned to that, but we have many, many panel members that either the company rises or falls on something. The science has always got to be good, but it rises or falls on something other than necessarily the science. So, can you go? Yeah, right there. So we have three new PDRC members. These people have been reviewers for CPRIT in the past and for quite a few years. They were recommended by the chair and the co-chair of the PDRC. And I don't know if you know any of these people. We talked to them. The other thing I wanted to mention, too, that I've also been kind of taken aback by is how excited people are to be on these panels. I mean, these three people were so excited to be able to be on the PDRC. And it's not just them, it's the reviewers, too. We've actually gotten some reviewers that basically, we didn't advertise, but I forget exactly how we got them, but they're like, I want to be a panel member. And so I find that, remarkably refreshing because, you get to the point where you've done some things for so many years and, but these people are all extremely enthusiastic about being on these panels. So I guess we'll get to the point of the voting meeting. So I wanted to point this out just because I found this remarkable too. You know that I did a lot of the IP due diligence for CPRIT for about 12 years. And it seemed typically kind of the same applications. I saw a lot of, CAR-T, saw a lot of ADC, saw a lot of, antibody inhibitors. But this cycle was really kind of interesting how different the applications were. And one of the things I'll mention is both the chair and the co-chair of the second chair of the PDRC said this was the strongest group of companies that they've had since they've been doing it. And both of them have been around for about 10 years. And so, and one of the things we did this time too was that the seed companies and the Texas companies were actually separated into two groups. And so the panels had all seed or they had all Texas companies from the PDRC. And that seemed to work out pretty well. So this is just a list, and I'll go through some of the companies quickly. But, there was a couple that were more traditional. But we have a radionuclide manufacturer and a device, some deep machine learning. And then three of them ended up being, products that had been used in the past, like paclitaxel or amifostine. And they were just repackaged, basically, to a better delivery system. Wasn't orally available, less toxic. And so I'll go through a couple of those companies quickly. But like I said, this was just interesting from my perspective, having done a lot of the due diligence, where I hadn't seen companies like this in quite a while. So the first company is Plus Therapeutics, and Plus Therapeutics is a publicly listed company that's based in Austin, which is developing rhenium-186. They're nanoliposomes, which is a novel radiotherapeutic to combat several cancers, including glioblastoma. 186 RNL is safe and well tolerated while delivering a radiation dose to the tumor that's up to 15 times higher than the typically achieved with standard radiation therapy. Plus is developing the product to treat leptomeningeal metastases, which are rare but typically fatal complication of advanced cancer that affects the fluid-line structures of the central nervous system. Plus, with the money, Plus intends to complete 2 parts of a multi-center phase 1 clinical trial of intrathecally delivered 186 RNL to treat LM, which would be included in compiling safety data, identifying the maximum tolerated dose, assessing safety, tolerability, efficacy, and in subjects with LM for phase 2 pivotal clinical trial. Then Plus intends to complete the multi-center phase 2 clinical trial of the IT-delivered 186, which will lead to preparations for a filing of an IND. The next company is Stellanova Therapeutics. They're a seed company. Stellanova is developing novel antibodies to block DKK3. This is more of traditional therapeutic for the treatment of triple-negative breast cancer and pancreatic cancer. Anti-DKK3 monoclonal antibodies inhibit tumor growth in mice and produce long-term survival with no toxicity. DKK3 promotes cancer cell growth and metastases, inhibits chemotherapeutic effects, and inhibits killer T cells. So obviously the inhibition of DKK3 could certainly help in cancer treatments. Stellanova is going to generate a high-quality producer cell line and generate CGMP qualified master cell bank for large-scale production of the development candidate. They're going to humanize the anti-DKK3 antibody, which can be used in IND studies. Acelia Therapeutics, they're also a seed company. They're a Houston-based, privately held development stage biopharmaceutical company, and they received a CPRIT award in 2020. Acelia is developing antibody therapies for cancers based on the discovery of the central role of the heat shock protein 70 in tumor antigen presentation, immune activation, and cellular stress responses. The difference between the 2 seed applications basically is the one is the heat shock protein is actually extracellular in one case, and in the other case, it's actually on the cell surface. So Acelia is developing an ADC based on an antibody 23987 that recognizes cell surface from heat shock protein 70. Acelia plans to humanize and optimize the mouse monoclonal antibody to be able to manufacture a cell line to produce the antibody, as well as to optimize a linker to connect the antibody to the drug. Acelia will also improve process development for the previous seed application, that's the antibody from the previous seed application, so they can perform IND-enabling toxicology studies. Adam Mines, this is something kind of off the beaten track, and they had actually applied previously to CPRIT, and it's only $2.5 million, even though it's a Texaco award, which I thought was interesting too. And what makes this most interesting is the fact that although they're making a radionuclide, and basically it starts with ytterbium-176 and is converted into lutetium-177. Most of the ytterbium-176 in the world actually is in Russia. And because of the situation as it is in the world today, need a domestic manufacturer, need a domestic company to actually produce the ytterbium-176. And they produce the ytterbium-176, which is then used by their German partner to make lutetium-177. And lutetium-177 is actually used in 2 products that Novartis has gotten approved. One most recently, I think in March, was Pluvicto, which treats pancreatic cancer. And then Lutathera, which also utilizes lutetium-177, I think is for like a neurological cancer. Adam Mines, they've demonstrated enrichment in medical grade purity of up to 99.5%. And the process that they use, which is in-licensed from the University of Texas in Austin, they hope to make 200 grams in the next 3 years and ultimately to produce kilogram quantities of ytterbium-176. Rapamycin Holdings is a Texaco company, basically using rapamycin, which was an FDA-approved ingredient. Rapamycin has previously shown promise in treating gastrointestinal disease and in cancer prevention, but it's particularly toxic. So Irapa is targeted to the colon and is delivered at lower doses, resulting in lower toxicity. The company is targeting colorectal cancer in patients with FAP. And the company proposes to manufacture the drug product to support the addition of a fourth cohort in the current phase 2 trial that they're running. The proposal would expand and complete the CPRIT-funded phase 2 study of Irapa in FAP. So this is another company that had a seed from CPRIT, and building on that seed, applied for a Texaco award. Zirian is a seed company as well and located in Houston, and uses emifostine, which is a well-known and is the only FDA-approved radioprotectant. But it has significant toxicity when given intravenously. So Zirian has developed an oral available emifostine, and it's actually a prodrug that's activated in the small intestine by an endogenous intestinal alkaline phosphatases. And Zirian intends to develop and test an enteric-coated version of emifostine that maximizes payload delivery in the duodenum in a time frame relevant for therapy that will be clinically efficacious. Zirian, during the seed time, will complete a GLP tox study, allowing the company to proceed with clinical 1 phase study safety trial in humans. They'll also evaluate the activity and tolerability of emifostine in a canine model and confirm that emifostine can protect intestinal tissue from radiation in a porcine model. Another one that's different than what we've funded in the past is the next seed application, which is Inform AI. And Inform AI is a Houston-based company focusing on AI solutions that speed up medical diagnosis at the point of care and improve radiologic productivity. Inform A1 proposes to create RAD-ONC A1, an artificial intelligence-guided dose predictive platform for planning radiation oncology in the head and neck region. To date, a minimally invasive, viable business prototype has been created, led by the work out of the University of Texas Southwest Medical Center, Medical Artificial Intelligence and Automation Laboratory. Wow, that's a mouthful. In collaboration with the Department of Radiation Oncology. During the seed grant, Inform AI intends to expand its data set, including acquiring access to additional 400 head and neck segmented and annotated head and neck de-identified patient scans. Inform AI will validate its label claims through clinical research with the purpose of preparing for FDA regulatory approval process. The other thing that was important in this is that AI will also ensure that its product is widely, if not universally, integratable with all the routine practice in radiation oncology. And that's one of the things that came up, is that will you be able to integrate into systems that already exist? And their belief is that it is. Therapeutics. This is the only Relco company, the relocation company. They're in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they will relocate to Texas if they receive the CPRIT award. Panther's first product, PTM-101, is a drug-eluting delivery implant intended to provide paclitaxel directly onto the tumor. So once again, it's a product, paclitaxel has been out for many, many years. It's just a different way to deliver it. So PTM-101 implant is minimally invasive and inserted during diagnostic laparoscopy. The platform has been demonstrated in preclinical validation, enabling chemotherapy to penetrate 40 times deeper and reach 5-fold higher concentration inside the tumor mass when compared to systemic delivery. The first-year development plan will focus on an expansion of already validated CMC and GMP manufacturing processes for the dose-escalated PTM-101, as well as compiling GLP tox studies. Upon IND clearance from the FDA, Panther will focus on enrollment and the completion of a phase 1b/2 trial in the U.S. and Australia in partnership with MD Anderson and other clinical sites. And the last company is Nucor Medical. It's a seed company, and it's like I said before, this is one of the devices that came up in the applications. It's a Houston-based medical device company, and they have a large collaboration between Johnson & Johnson's Center for Medical Device Innovation and the Texas Medical Center. They also have a third company involved in it, California-based Precision Thoracic. And what they're trying to do is innovate novel technology focused on early interception, diagnosis, and treatment of lung cancer. So Nucor has developed something called MITRE, minimally invasive targeted resection. It's the first medical device designed to safely remove lung nodules in a simple, quick, and minimally invasive procedure. And the MITRE core procedure will enable clinicians to remove suspicious nodules upon initial detection, which will provide a definitive diagnosis of the nodule. In their 3 years, the company will strengthen its clinical and commercial case for MITRE core through clinical data analytics, as well as prepare for a first-in-human study through regulatory submission. And they're going to manufacture clinical build devices and advance the device through first-in-human study. And like I said, J&J has been very involved in supporting Nucor. The last slide basically is kind of the product development research priorities and how they all panned out in this particular round. With that, I'll conclude.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Are there any questions for Dr. Smith?
I just have one. The company moving from the east.
Cambridge.
There you go. Cambridge, sorry, I couldn't remember. How do you guys define relocation or when people move? Is that just the whole building comes with a staff, the CEO,
No, there are 7 criteria, and I only remember 6 of them. and now I was at bio and only remembered 6 of them, and now I bet you I know 4. So, but we have a definitive criterion by
If
which.
you could just email it to me, I'd be fine with that.
Sure.
Thank you. Any further questions? All right. Mr. Burgess says certified compliance of the product development award process. It is my understanding that Dr. Cummings reported a conflict of interest with one of the proposed product development award recommendations and will recuse himself from the vote. Are there any other conflicts of interest? Hearing none. Members, you have the list of applications and grant amounts recommended by the PIC for the 9 product development research grant awards. The Oversight Committee will approve the PIC's recommendations if 2/3 of the members agree. We will first take a vote on the application that Dr. Cummings has recused himself from considering. I will entertain a motion to approve the PIC's recommendation for Product Development Research Award to Rapamycin Holdings as presented by Dr. Smith.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Hearing approval from at least 2/3 of the members, the motion carries. I note for the record that Dr. Cummings did not vote. Now we will consider the 8 other proposed awards in one vote unless an Oversight Committee member wishes to take up the recommendations separately. Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the PIC's recommendations for product development research awards to the 8 companies as presented by Dr. Smith.
So moved.
Second.
So moved.
All in favor, vote aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. Hearing approval from at least 2/3 of the members, the motion carries. I will entertain a motion to delegating contract negotiation authority to the CEO and CPRIT staff and to authorize the CEO to sign award contracts on behalf of CPRIT.
So
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. I will entertain a motion delegating contract negotiation authority. Sorry?
You already did that.
We did
Oh,
that.
did that.
sorry. That's why I have my friend here. I always have my lawyer with me wherever I go. I would advise, no, I won't. Members, Mr. Roberts notified the board on August 11 that he seeks authority to disburse grant awards or grant funds in advance to the 9 companies we have just approved for awards. Are there any questions for Mr. Roberts regarding his request?
Sure. Why?
These companies frequently have startup expenses that need to be covered, and through the compliance and the grad accountants, we make darn sure that this stuff is spent appropriately.
Okay. Thank you.
Pursuant to the General Appropriations Act, Article 9, Section 4.02A, do I have a motion to authorize the CPRIT to disburse grants via the advance payments upon execution of the award contracts and the successful completion of tranches to the 9 companies approved by the Oversight Committee?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 11.
Sorry, I should have told you I replaced that.
That's all right. Next, we will take the internal auditor's report. The chair recognizes Mr. Graves to present CPRIT internal audit report and the fiscal year 2023 audit plan.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for having me again this morning. If you'll turn to page 8.1 in your materials, I'll give you a brief update of our audit plan and schedule. You'll see that we have 2 remaining audits that we're in progress on this year. That is a vendor contract compliance. The scope of that audit is really looking at some of the key vendor contracts and examining and testing their compliance with the terms and conditions of those contracts. The second is a compliance check on procurement. The state auditor's office asks us to disclose every year what type of procedures we've done over procurement. This one helps satisfy that report. That's also included in the annual report, which will be performed and provided to you later this year before the November deadline. So that will help fulfill those requirements, just so that we can disclose we've done something over procurement there. We've had a lot of activity over procurement in the last several years, so I don't really have any concerns with this. The remaining, we've got a few internal audit follow-ups that we're in progress and should complete by the end of August. The key activity for this quarter that we are presenting to you and asking for your approval is the annual internal audit plan for fiscal year 2023. So we performed an internal audit update, risk assessment update, which, as Vince told you, is separate from their risk assessment. So we updated our internal audit risk assessment and consulted with management and created a plan, which is on tab 8.4 or page 8.4 of your materials. That is the proposed fiscal year 2023 internal audit plan. In that plan, we have 2 audit advisory engagements, which are contract risk assessment. So in May 2022, the comptroller published a new Texas procurement and contract management guide. And within that guide, there's some requirements to perform a vendor risk assessment. So similar to how before we were the internal auditor back in 2014, we helped create the risk assessment that Vince still uses. We will help create one for contracts, all the key contracts that the agency uses to help comply with some of the requirements in the new contract management guide. And so that's the scope of that procedures. And then we'll also do some updates with some audit advisory work over the post-award grant compliance program, which is everything that Vince does and the compliance group does, which includes just revisiting the risk assessment, the changes he and his group have made since we helped develop that many years ago, as well as just their general activities, their audit procedures, and performing some advisory and refresh and updates over all of those activities. So that's the scope, the plan scope for that audit. The last one for fiscal year 2023 that's planned is the IT general controls. And I know you're all well aware of the progress, the findings we've had historically, the progress that has been made over this last year through some of the consulting activities that we've performed. as well as the hard work of the IT staff. In the scope of this audit, as mentioned by the audit subcommittee, we'll also perform a warm welcome to the new ISO and follow up on some of the information security findings. He'll love to hear that now that this is his first Oversight Committee meeting. But we will do that as part of that scope as well as just perform any follow-ups on open internal audit findings that remain after this fiscal year. So this plan, should you approve it, would be included in the annual internal audit report that is prescribed, where the content of that is prescribed by the State Auditor's Office. Guidance for that came out last week. I've already reviewed it. There are no significant changes to this year's guidance that really affect CPRIT. So it'll be very similar to last year's report and content and form. And this would be included in there that would then need to be disclosed in that one. That report is due November 1st to the State Auditor's Office, the Governor's Office, and the LBB, recognizing that we may not get your approval of that report prior to that date. We'll ask for an extension, and they've routinely granted those for agencies whose board and oversight committees meet after that November 1st due date. So with that, I'll open for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, Dr. Hernandez?
I'm assuming, sir, under your 2022 internal audit follow-ups, the one you canceled because you completed it already, no longer necessary?
No, sir. That one we presented last time is canceled. The records management, grantee compliance, that has it's an extremely heavy IT component. That has to do with the movement of records from the Cohn-Resnick portal into the internal portal, and then given the changes in IT and the issues we dealt with this year, it was determined the best approach for that was to cancel that audit for this year, given the limited nature of internal resources the agency had. And I think we presented this one to you last quarter as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If there are no further questions, is there a motion to approve the fiscal year 2023 internal audit plan?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. The chair recognizes Mr. Roberts to present his appointments to the Scientific Research and Prevention Program Committees.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. I appointed 27 experts to our academic and product development peer review panels. Some of these have been already discussed earlier in this meeting. By law, I'm required, after I make these appointments, that you approve them. At their August 4th meeting, the Board Governance Subcommittee reviewed the appointees and recommends approval by the Oversight Committee. They were also reviewed by the relevant program subcommittees. I request approval.
Are there any questions for Mr. Roberts or the Board Governance Subcommittee? Hearing none. Is there a motion to approve the CEO's 27 appointments to the Scientific Research and Prevention Program Committees?
So moved. Second.
So moved.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Hearing none, motion carries. Members, we will have the final advisory committee annual presentation for 2022. CPRIT provided the clinical trial advisory committee's report in your packet. Dr. LeBeau, please introduce Dr. Gail Eckhart, who will provide the clinical trial advisory committee's annual report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Gail Eckhart, who's joining us in her capacity as chair of CPRIT's Clinical Trials Advisory Committee. Dr. Eckhart is a tenured professor and inaugural director of the Livestrong Cancer Institute's chair of the Department of Oncology and associate dean of cancer programs at the University of Texas at Austin's Dell Medical School. Dr. Eckhart is a leader in oncology and thought leader in clinical trials in the nation, and serves on a number of committees and study sections, including the American Society of Clinical Oncology, or ASCO's Molecular Oncology Task Force, its board of directors, the FDA Oncology Drugs Advisory Committee, the National Cancer Institute's Cancer Center Study Section. She's also a member of NCI's Investigational Drug Steering Committee and serves on 11 external advisory boards of NCI-designated cancer centers. She was a lead mentor in ASCO's Leadership Development Program and is currently a member of the Board of Directors of the Association of American Cancer Institutes. She is a principal investigator on a number of grants involving early clinical trials and colorectal cancer research and has conducted numerous early phase clinical trials. Her areas of interest, as I've just mentioned, are in preclinical and early clinical development and combinations of molecularly targeted compounds with a disease focus on colorectal cancer. In closing, I will just mention one of her many seminal accomplishments and traits, which is that she is a native Texan.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to present on CTAC. And actually, thank you for facilitating the recruitment of me from Colorado to Texas now about 6 years ago. I think probably at this very committee meeting, I was approved to receive an REI. So I'm very appreciative of that and very happy to be presenting to you about the CTAC. Now, I did want to provide a little anecdote related to Dean Ramos's presentation, and that is that my career in drug development was actually launched back in 1992 at what was called the Institute for Drug Development in San Antonio, Texas. And so that was at the time in the 90s, from 92 till about 2000, San Antonio was the leader in drug development, actually globally. We had the largest phase 1 program in the world. We enrolled about 500 patients per year on phase 1 trials, and we had regular interactions with biotech within Texas and also industry outside of Texas. So in my view, I think San Antonio is poised to go back to returning to the center of excellence status in terms of Texas drug development. So just a little plug there. So what I'm going to do, next slide, please. So I thought what I would do is review some of the current composition of CTAC membership. And you can see here, I've been chair, I think, for the last meeting, and this has been our membership for this calendar year. And you can see that we have a nice representation from cancer centers in Texas, as well as Baylor, Scott, and White. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the justification for some of the CTAC membership revisions, but certainly we think that we should have members from both the Prevention Advisory Council as well as the one on childhood cancer so that we can start thinking about ways in which some of the RFAs and plans can be streamlined across the committees. We would also like to add an industry member that has broad expertise in engaging communities, not only diverse communities, but also in Texas where we have rural communities as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We'd also like to replace a vacancy of a member that we had recommended from the Product Development Advisory Committee. And lastly, you may or may not know that many NCI-designated cancer centers now have leaders around diversity, equity, inclusion, we call it DEI, as well as leaders around COE, which is community outreach and engagement. These are really NCI-mandated positions, and I think it would be great to consider. We have, as you know, we have cancer center directors, but it would be really nice, I think, to consider getting a leader onto the committee from one of the NCI centers in Texas. Next slide. So you can see our meetings here. I'm not going to read through this, but really in March was, in some respects, trying to set the cadence There had been a little bit of a gap related to COVID, and so we discussed having quarterly meetings, as well as starting to develop metrics for the new RFAs that had been released. And I'll talk about those RFAs in a minute. And then at the most recent one, we started thinking about ways in which we may want to modify the RFAs and also discuss the things that we would be presenting today. Next slide. So what I want to do here with a couple of what I think of as the cumulative clinical research data slides is just present, it's probably a little bit over 10 years of cumulative clinical research data, and showing both the number of clinical trials, number of patients, the impact in terms of publications. And then below, I've shown some graphs about demographics and then looking at the total number of clinical trials by category. And I'll make a few points. One is, this is very robust accrual. This is almost 40,000 patients that have been enrolled in the last 10 years. And I think that's remarkable. And you can see here the vast number of publications or scholarly activity, expansion of impact that has occurred through the publications. In the graph below, you can see that we have a lot of work to do to increase diversity. And I think the other component we need to be thinking about is, can we start reporting also the geographic diversity so that we can look at some of the rural areas in Texas. And then on the bottom, I think really it's a nice mix of both interventional trials as well as observational trials. Next slide. Now this shows the number of clinical trials by purpose, and I've shown in the key what that means. And again, sitting on the 11 different Cancer Center external advisory boards that I'm on, this is a nice mix. It's a nice composition of different types of clinical trials. And I think even when you look below at the number of interventional clinical trials by the phase, again, I'm really struck coming from other parts of the U.S. before coming here and reviewing cancer center grants, that this, again, is a very nice mix of trials going from feasibility and pilot studies up to even phase 3 trials. So I think this data is very positive in my view. Next slide. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit about the recent RFAs, and these are near and dear to me because I was part of CTAC during the development of both of these RFAs. And the first one is what we call the Early Clinical Investigator Award. Now, the rationale behind this you may or may not be aware of, but the clinician scientist is indeed becoming a dying breed across the country at cancer centers. And this is something that every single cancer center in the U.S. is reporting this issue. And it's really due to what we call aggressive productivity metrics. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that there are ways now that chemotherapy revenue has become so lucrative for hospital systems that there are now metrics around each and every oncologist so that hospital systems and others can, basically it's a P&L, right? So it's looking at ways in which to bring more revenue into the system, understanding that these hospitals are not necessarily for profit, but that's how they grow. They grow their programs through this. And so the problem has become that an academic clinical investigator really has less protected time for protocol development and patient accrual. And the metrics of this have played out over and over again across the country. And interestingly, it's at a time when drug development is booming. So not only are we getting better at molecularly selected therapy, but now we have immunotherapy adding into the mix. And on top of that, what we call rational combinations of really both of those, as well as chemotherapy. So this is really, that was the rationale behind developing this RFA. It was definitely for early investigators that are often the most at risk around protected time. And the idea was to give them 50% protected time and to give them a sufficient amount of money over 5 years, and a clinical protocol was required. And you can see below what the various RFAs, when they were released, and how many grants were submitted and how many were funded. Next slide, please. So if we look at the total number of applicants, and this is this includes all of the periods, but not the funded ones here. So we're talking 25 total applicants. Now, when I look at the male-female distribution of the applicants, I start to get worried, because we know in medical school that at this point, men and women are balanced. Sometimes schools even have more women than men, so I worry that we're not getting a balanced applicant. But I think when you look at the number of institutions represented, that is reasonable. And then when we look at the awardees, of which at this point there are 9, others are pending. The thing that really stuck out to me, because I actually have been trying to promote women in leadership across the country in oncology, I was disappointed to see that none of the awards went to women. And again, fairly good distribution of institutions. I just gave a couple of types of examples of studies here so that you understand that it is a mix. It's not all treatment. And thus far, this is very early for these mechanisms, especially during the time of COVID. But, there has been some accrual and there have been publications. So at our meeting this year, we discussed, obviously, that we need to get better at ensuring gender balance and also diversification. This is a problem across the country. We're a little bit worried that in the review process, there may be a bias towards a physician scientist. Now, what that means is really someone who may have maybe half a day a week or a day of week in the lab, but really are not a clinical investigator. And that the intent of the RFA was for the clinician investigator, so we need to be aware of that. And then there's been some concern about the ability to hire clinicians with that much protected time. But again, we also recognize that for a clinical investigator, their laboratory, so to speak, is the clinic. So it's really being able to protect the clinical time that they have for clinical research. And I think the bottom line, when we start talking about impact, is that really it's the retention and promotion of these clinicians, right? Because these are the people that are translating the elegant science that CPRIT has been wonderful about funding into the clinic and to the patients where we hope to have impact. Next slide. So another new RFA that's quite new in its development, but something that we discussed was the idea that now that we have this amazing drug development going on, that in Texas, that we don't necessarily have sufficient qualified investigators, and now this is really going after the sites. We also feel like there needs to be more access in both the rural and underserved areas. And I think the third point is important. So it used to be thought that you could just reserve phase 2 and 3 trials to go out into the community and in rural areas. Well, I think we all know that there is accelerated approval of agents in phase 1 that are so active that they go to market. Well, it's an equity issue that we now provide access to these early phase clinical trials out into the community and out in the rural areas. It's extremely important. The funding mechanism is shown here. The stage is really related to trying to set up initially around the lead institution with network hospitals and then further branching out. And you can see here that right now what we're really, in terms of applications, 5 submitted and 1 funded that I'll be reporting on. Next slide, please. So I wanted to show this graphic that I believe Kent Osborne made and probably presented to you earlier. But I wanted to make the point that really the way I think of this, as well as others, is that this is a lead institution mentoring plan around early phase clinical trials, getting out to the community, to underserved areas, and to rural areas. So you really start with the lead institution that is generally going to be a cancer center. It doesn't necessarily have to be NCI designated, but a center of excellence around early phase trials, branching out to the first tier of network hospitals, and then hopefully branching even further out into rural and community areas. Next slide, please. So when you look at the metrics here, it's too early for us to have much in terms of impact. We did have 5 applicants. 1 was awarded. And so the one that was awarded went to MD Anderson as the lead institution. And really what they were trying to do, again, in sort of that mentoring component, is to develop their county hospital as a network site to be able to provide clinical trials, as well as UTMB Galveston. And then in phase 2, to really move outside of Houston to more underserved populations. Right now, it's a little bit too early to assess any of the typical metrics. But again, when we start looking at who was funded and what was submitted, I think the committee discussed some concerns over representation and distribution of the lead institutions. I think all of us recognize that it is very difficult to set up these negotiations between the lead institutions and network hospitals. And I think we continue to be worried that rural West Texas is underrepresented. And then lastly, just this problem that we have, and this would be anywhere in the world, local competition among hospital systems and practices. So I think, the take-home message was at our last meeting was, perhaps we need to really reimagine and reinvigorate this plan. Next slide. So I want to take you to really the current environmental context because it's quite different than it was 5 years ago. First of all, the NCI, which has really been working on this for quite some time, but as well as other cancer organizations, but I think in particular the FDA and now industry are really aligned on continuing to diversify enrollment. And the second thing is very important, and that is we are no longer willing to just put phase 2 and 3 trials in the community, and that early clinical trials is an equity issue. And that what we know is that traditionally they've primarily been comprised of white patients with socioeconomic advantages. But we have a real opportunity because during COVID, many of our centers, including our center in Austin that has a phase 1 unit, in order to continue to treat patients who were on trials, modifications had to be made to enable remote participation and monitoring of these trials. And I can tell you one of the biggest hurdles reported for why patients don't go on study is really a logistical transportation one. So this was a big change. And then lastly, just this April, FDA published a draft guidance so that now when industry is submitting a clinical trial proposal with an IND or getting approval, that they really now have to have a diversity plan and underrepresented racial and ethnic subgroups as part of that submission. So how can we now, within this current environment, reimagine a Texas Clinical Trials Network. Next slide. So, well, obviously we had to go back and do some discovery work. So at the March meeting, we set out to do this work. And I really wanted to start with Patrick Lehrer, who you may or may not know, but he's famous, as is Larry Einhorn, as being the group up at Indiana University that basically cured testicular cancer. But Patrick, or Pat as he's known, also years ago, so this is a historical perspective, set up the Hoosier Oncology Group, which we all call HOG. And we wanted to really get lessons learned from him in really this historical model. And it was set up as a way to, you know, engage the community. The incentive back then could be as simple as a community PI being able to present at ASCO. The good thing was it wasn't just industry studies, it was investigator-initiated studies. But they did find that the only trials that were feasible in this system were phase 2s and 3s, so they had to be fairly simple. And the community issues were numerous, some of the main ones always being money, the time to create the infrastructure, the fact that it was difficult and continues to be difficult to provide incentives for the time and effort it takes to enroll patients on trials, and really the inability to take on phase 1s in this setting. I just made a comment here about the next iteration of this, the Big Ten Cancer Research Consortium. And really what this is going to be is led by cancer centers, so it's not really getting at the community issue, but it's trying to get larger cancer centers to work together. Next slide. Next, because I was on ODAC for 5 years, which is the Oncology Drug Advisory Committee, where when there's generally a problem, the ODAC is called in to weigh in on particular oncology products. And I was chair of it for 1 year. So I contacted Rick and Paul. And my question was, okay, so in the post-COVID environment, are there going to be inherent regulatory roadblocks to continue to utilize these types of practices? And I was kind of surprised. The answer was no. And then you can see the FDA quote, which they're always great at making things sound simple, but we know when it comes to the regulatory burden, it's not always simple. But I think at least the idea is that they are approaching with an open mind the idea that we need to continue to use what are called decentralized clinical trial, DCT practices, post-COVID, really to enable diversification and into rural communities as well. And so, you know, their view, even in phase 1, was unless there was an inherent safety issue, like if you think an intensive care unit is required, then certainly you're not going to have someone out in a community site. But otherwise, there was no regulatory barrier inherent. And so what we have learned in this initial discovery process was, unfortunately, that really the conventional academic community partnership has been ineffective in providing access to early phase trials, not only underserved patients, but to rural areas. And secondly, though, post-COVID, there are no hard regulatory barriers to use what we call DCT principles in really trying to achieve this diversification and geographic diversification as well. So next to last slide here, I believe. So what are our next steps to really generate ideas around a next generation Texas CTN? Well, I talked about expanding CTAC membership so that we can have the right expertise and stakeholders. We're setting up a call with Dr. Pat LaRusso, who's quite famous in phase 1. We've known one another a long time, and she recently from Yale has developed a hybrid decentralization model, again, trying to utilize these principles to better serve the community. I was part of a panel of Harvard around diversification and met Dr. Ruma Bhagat, who's at Genentech and has been really working with academic sites and industry to promote this from the industry side. And she's going to join our next CTAC meeting, and we're hoping she'll be able to also join as an industry member. And then really what we want to think about with both the reinvigorated membership and expertise, the principles of DCT, we can really re-examine the ways that CPRIT can better engage underserved and rural communities in Texas and really consider a staged step towards the next gen Texas CTN. And in fact, Dr. Lair thinks that Texas should lead this cause. And we said, yes, we agree. So in conclusion, I didn't make this comment, but I think all of you know that COVID greatly impacted all of the clinical research programs throughout Texas. We did, sort of somewhat in this period, launch 2 new RFAs that are relatively early, but we think that we're going to have a lot of impact. We think for the EC Investigator Award, we just need to make sure that we're targeting the right clinical investigators. We'd like to see diversification of the applicants and awardees. And then I've talked about the Clinical Trials Network, really to leverage the lessons learned during COVID and to consider stepwise revision towards a next-gen Texas CTN. But I think, looking at that cumulative data and looking at the RFAs and what is possible and going forward, I think CPRIT is poised to have great impact on clinical research programs in Texas. And I think it's really up to us to stay relevant and responsive to a ever-changing global clinical research environment so that we can serve all Texas cancer patients. Next slide. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Eckert. Questions from the members? Dr. Hernandez?
Yes, a great presentation of your commentaries. I think we've heard it multiple times already in different meetings from different presenters, but at the end of the day, it's about equity and access to all Texans when it comes to research and treatment, clinical trials or drug trials, or even moving companies around, and to service Texas. I, for one, I know people always want to go out and get some big hero to help us out and get things done. But I think Texas has enough brain power to get it done by itself. All we really lack is the willpower to do it. This board, for instance, we're responsible for funding for cancer research. That impacts patients directly. We have the ability to move resources to enhance the delivery system to those communities, whether it be North Texas, Lubbock, West, or the South Texas area. That's what we're here for. So we should be able to push that agenda forward. Whether private companies like it or not, that's what we're here for. We're for them, the population of Texas. And I think we really need to start looking at, we have some great leadership here with Mr. Wayne here, and we also have great RFAs being proposed. But at times, I wonder, does it really matter if one scientist doesn't get hired at Baylor, one, and we move that resource somewhere else where it's terribly lacking, like Lubbock or West Texas? I don't think it's a big deal. We should be moving those resources. A lot of these medical centers have plenty of resources, plenty of scientists, plenty of infrastructure already. They already have it. They're not going to die or close shop because we decide to move resources where it's desperately needed. So I, for one, urge my colleagues to reconsider some of these great presentations that are being placed and move a little more aggressive when it comes to those areas, because those patients are really, they're equally important. Everybody's a Texan, in my opinion. Thank you.
And I totally agree with you. And I think that what we're trying to do is to think about ways, because one of the problems I think when you look at rural areas of Texas has been the ability of patients to be transported to sites that have capabilities for early phase trials. And I think what we want to do is to say, hey, we've got these new tools that we developed during COVID. And I can tell you firsthand, the ability to evaluate patients, to send have local labs done close to home. They just go to, a local commercial lab. The ability to send drug out to the patients, that's fine. That's been developed. Consenting has been developed. Remote monitoring, even on the part of industry, has been developed. So I agree with you. What we need to do now is to say, okay, now is the time, and now we have the tools to do it.
Mr. Marco?
I noticed on your slide related to the testing of over 10 years, the number of patients that were involved in that, you had, I'm assuming the Hispanics were included in the white. Is that correct?
Patty may have to address that. I'm not sure exactly how CPRIT had, all of this is self-reported data from the investigators.
Because there were no listing for Hispanics, and I'm assuming they must have been in the white, but it would be nice to know what the percentages were.
Unfortunately, the columns were a little bit condensed and some of the headings were lost on that. The Hispanics, right now we just had racial data shown. We didn't have ethnicity. And so the Hispanics would be included.
In the white?
In the white.
They could be included in a variety of categories.
I assumed it had to be in the white, though, looking at the numbers there.
Right. Looking at the numbers, most likely, yes.
Okay.
Dr. Rice?
Gail, thank you for your presentation. Good to see you. I wondered, just as a kind of broad comment, you've listed 40,000 patients that have participated, I guess, in a one-year period or something like that in clinical trials. And I wondered, what would be the goal number, do you think? Should we have 100,000, or like how far off are we in where we should be? Appreciating maybe every single cancer patient ideally would be in a clinical trial. I'm not sure that's where we can get in any practical sense. But what's your sense on what the challenge is here, given 40,000 sort of the context of what we know?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is, so the NCI used to have a standard metric that was used for interventional therapeutic trials, which was set at, the bar was set at about 10% of analytic cases. And so clearly, the problem is you have to not only be able to get the analytic cases reported, but, then the problem is how do you engage the sites that are more difficult to reach? So I think before I would want to set that boundary, I would want to know more about what that distribution of cancer patients is in the rural areas. But I agree with you. I think we should set a bar. And the bars have been set before for cancer centers, and I think that we don't have to reinvent the wheel there. It's a good point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eckert, and your committee. I've sat in your committee and listened to members. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question from the disembodied divine.
Please.
Dr. Eckhart, thank you very much for excellent presentation and for your assistance and service on that committee. I had a question on the model you showed us for a lead cancer center and then regional cancer centers that follow. What is the incentive for the lead center to devote resources to other institutions? It seems like to me there would be an incentive to grab the resources, all the resources possible, instead of, taking time and money and effort to support the other smaller regional centers still developing.
So the incentive, I think, is something that comes as being, in particular, an NCI designated cancer center. So it's a mandate. It's a clear mandate that you reach, a certain level of diversification, that you have what's called a catchment area. You actually have to talk about where the patients come into your cancer center, and are you actually distributing clinical trials evenly throughout that catchment area? So on the NCI side, the good thing is you have a mandate to do that. And so that's where the incentive comes from. But I actually think, so I sit on the AACI board where we actually have non-NCI designated cancer centers. But I still would argue that I think all cancer centers that serve the public in Texas are really faced with this dilemma right now. And yes, the problem is that you need sort of the money to do that. But I think the reality is that they need to speak to their constituency, which is their catchment area, which is often not being well served through the current mechanisms. So I think it's a little bit of a double approach. Some of it is being mandated by the NCI, and I think others is really the fact that Texas is large, and it's just so obvious that we're missing huge populations.
Who defines the catchment area?
So the Cancer Center is able to define it. They can describe how they want to do it, but it has to do with, for instance, the zip codes of patients coming in. They cannot carve out. It really started because there were areas of pretty world-renowned cancer centers that were situated in areas of underrepresented groups that really didn't serve them. So it has to be something related to an area. If you look at some of the centers in, for instance, Indiana and Wisconsin, they actually describe the whole state as the catchment area. So it differs from center to center. But for example, a center in Houston still has to be able to provide services to the people that are local to that center, not just people coming from outside the state.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm going to circle back one more time, reflecting off of Dr. Hernandez's comments. And again, I'm not sure this is worthwhile, but if there was a way for us to look at regions in Texas and then say we have some indication of the cancer volume, and again, it may be that there's lots of details of which types of cancer. So setting that aside for a second, and I'm just making up these numbers just because that's what comes to my head. But if there's 100,000 cancers in 5 regions, and you said 10% should be probably in clinical trials, I'd say, well, okay, each region should have 10,000. Again, I'm just making up numbers. And then in South Texas, you could say we only identify 500, but we identify 5,000 in another place. Well, then you'd see the gap, and we clearly have a vision of the gap. I wonder if there's a worthwhile exercise to sort of quantify the gap, which may be in data that's not pure, but then we'd have a more specific picture of, well, we need more clinical trials in Texas. Got that, but we need more clinical trials in the rural areas. We got that, but we need 17,000 more participants in these 16 counties. Then you'd have a very focused idea of what the effort should be and how you might focus it.
No, I think it's a great point. And I think actually you could obtain some of that data from the existing NCI cancer centers that are really mandated to get that data. And if you could share it, I think what you would find is that there would be a disparate, distribution. But you could also look for areas that are just, and I think this has been one of the concerns about West Texas, is there's just a hole, where it's not necessarily being covered by a center. So I think it's a great point, and I think it is data that can be obtained. Not easily, but it can be obtained.
Dr. Hernandez.
When you say it's not easily obtained, we don't have the technology, the software, or people don't play nice in the same sandbox?
It's hard to get the denominator. So that is where you have to have hospitals and practices that are telling you how many analytic cancer cases are coming in to that particular area. That's been the toughest thing to get at many of these centers.
So they lack infrastructure to get it done?
Yes.
Okay.
Dr. Rice.
Again, we're not trying to invent processes and services here at this level, of course, but you can imagine insurance billing would be one place you could get diagnostics and other kinds of, administrative data that might exist. That if that was a direction we might go, that might be a whole, effort we might, endeavor to work in,
Question. Ramona, where's Ramona? In West Texas, and all of the grants we have on prevention grants, and when we identify colorectal cancer or breast cancer or cervical cancer and all that, is any of that data transferable to some of this, where you might have people who have tested positive, who are under treatment, that we don't have that data where they could be as part of these clinical trials?
It's an interesting question. There are some HIPAA regulations that would come into play, which we are not HIPAA certified. So we don't ask for any, identifiable information.
That's not what he's asking. He's asking if somebody has cancer, we should say, and one came from El Paso, two came from, we don't need their private information. We just want to know the frequency, the epidemiology study. You have that data, I would imagine. You collect it.
We do not collect it on cancers. We collect it on activities. The reason for not collecting it on cancers is because of the HIPAA regulation that in a county such as Loving County, there are 50 people, easily identifiable, and that's why we don't ask exactly what county the person who cancer was detected in.
So you're telling me that by law, you're telling me that because you have 50 people in a city, that you can't quantify when somebody has cancer in that city?
The HIPAA regulations come into play. I
know they do.
have them
I'm just asking.
all.
Is that what you're saying?
Their law.
Yeah.
Okay.
This problem has come up every year in some respect.
I'm not talking about CPRIT getting involved, but the institutions that have identified, that we've received the grants and have identified the thing, have those institutions somehow figure out, irrespective of HIPAA, how you tie it in where they may have people involved or needed for clinical trials. That's all I'm asking.
I mean, how does Medicare do it? I mean, they collect data from all over the nation, and they know where the diseases exist.
They do.
And, and everybody knows who has Medicare, right, at a certain age.
That's it.
Right, but that's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're still putting it out.
Mr. Margot, the answer to your earlier question, of the 40,165 patients on clinical trials, 10,931, so about 27% were Hispanic.
Thank you.
How many of those were?
Thank you, Dr. Eckert. I appreciate your presentation and your committee's hard work. At the end of the day, it's not mandates, but doing the right thing for the people of Texas. I appreciate your input. The chair recognizes Mr. Roberts to present the fiscal year 2023 honoraria policy.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. Our statute requires me, with your approval, to adopt a policy for honoraria paid for peer review services. While the proposed FY 2023 honoraria for prevention and academic research reviewers remain unchanged, the proposed 23 policy includes changes for product development honoraria to accommodate approved alterations that you folks have made to the 23 review process. These proposed changes include a preliminary review process and greater flexibility for use of ad hoc expert reviewers. I think Dr. Smith did a good job of summarizing those changes earlier. The Product Development, OC Product Development Subcommittee reviewed these changes on August the 11th and recommends approval. I request your approval.
Are there any questions for Mr. Roberts? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the fiscal year 2023 honoraria policy?
So moved. Second.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. The chair recognizes Mr. Roberts to present the Health and Safety Code Section 102.1062 waivers for fiscal year 2023.
This will take a minute, Dr. Patel. I suggest that I go ahead and, unless you object, that I provide a summary for each of the ones that we're requesting and then let y'all go ahead and make a motion for all of them, unless you want to sever any one of them. The first one is the odd one, and all of these you have approved previously. But this one is a conflict of interest waiver for review council members pursuant to state law. Unlike other conflict of interest waivers that the OC has approved previously, we don't grant this waiver for a specific conflict of interest or person. Instead, we invoke this waiver as necessary to address the unusual scenario when a review council member has a conflict with a grant application that is part of the larger group of proposals that the review panel or review council must act upon. The waiver is necessary for a review council member to participate in the overall discussion and vote on the slate of awards recommendations. This waiver is, as I said, the same as was approved last year. The second one concerns the Commissioner of Health and State Health Services participation on the Program Integration Committee. The Department of Health, the Department of State Health Services, is a possible applicant for some of our awards. And this waiver is necessary for the Commissioner Hellerstadt to participate on the PIC if, in that event, DSHS applies for a grant. Adequate protections are in place to mitigate factors other than merit in the established grant criteria affecting the award of grant funds. Again, this is the same as previously approved for the past several years. Unfortunately, we found out in the last 10 days that Dr. Hellerstadt is retiring. I'm not aware, they may have identified an interim commissioner, but when that person is identified, we'll probably need to come back to y'all, possibly at the September meeting, but certainly the November meeting. We hate to see Dr. Hellerstadt leave. He's been a real benefit to our process. The next one is for our tennis referee, Don Brandy, who is our purchaser and hub coordinator. Even though he's not involved in the grant application and reporting process in his official capacity, there is, I suppose, some chance that this could enter into play. What he does is he referees NCAA tennis tournaments at UT. And this one also has been approved previously. I will say that with respect to all of these, they can be altered at any time, based upon circumstances. So I request your approval for them.
Are there any questions for Mr. Roberts? None? Hearing none. Is there a motion to approve the three proposed Health and Safety Code Section 102.1062 waivers for fiscal year 2023?
So moved.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. The Chair recognizes Ms. Eckel to discuss the proposed administrative rule changes under Agenda Item 16.
Good morning, still, barely.
Good morning.
The rules are located behind tab 13 of your meeting books. We have proposed changes impacting 5 different sections of Chapter 703. The first change applies to 703.11, and it would allow grantee expenses for relocating to Texas to be eligible to be used as meeting their matching funds requirements to help grantees meet that requirement. Our second administrative rule change is to 703.24, and it's related to financial status reports. It would require grantees to provide any corrections to financial status report supporting documentation that may be requested from CPRIT staff. It would ask grantees to submit that within 5 business days of the request. Currently, grantees are allowed 21 days, and if the grantees could not provide the requested information, then CPRIT may disapprove the FSR for the grantee to resubmit it. And the last three changes actually accomplish the same goal. We're just changing our references and our administrative rules to the Uniform Grant Management Standards with the Texas Grant Management Standards, which Texas Grant Management Standards replaced the Uniform Grant Management Standards this year. It's administered by the Comptroller's Office, and CPRIT refers to it when we don't have agency-specific rule in place related to grantees.
We would love to have someone come over from the Comptroller's Office and go through in detail this grant management rules and regulations.
Yes, and I'm sure.
Are there any questions for Ms. Eckel? Dr. Hernandez?
Ms. Eckel, could you restate, what did you say about the relocation and the match requirement?
So in 70311, we provide examples of how grantees can meet their matching funds requirements by giving them categories of eligible expenses. And so we are just adding relocation to Texas expenses.
Regardless of their higher ed institution, it doesn't matter if it's private company?
No, just as long as they're needing to fulfill their matching funds requirement. For institutions of higher education, it would be those that don't meet their
But this is
federal
this is
indirect cost rate.
relocation. So
It makes sense, yeah.
Okay, great. I'm sure you said it right. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further questions. Members, there's a motion to approve the publication of the proposed changes to the Texas Administrative Code Chapter 703 in the Texas Register.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Eckel. Now turning to agenda item 17, the chair recognizes Ms. McConnell to present the Chief Operating Officer's report.
Good morning.
Morning.
So you have my report behind tab 14. I'll just highlight a few things. CPRIT received a little over $200,000 in revenue sharing payments during the third quarter of the fiscal year. That included quarterly royalty payments of a little more than $27,000 from the sales revenue of Wellereg from Merck. And so now our total revenue sharing deposits are a little over $7.7 million. I'll also highlight on the second page of my report that in addition to the contract approvals that will follow, we do have some contract renewals that are under $100,000. That includes our financial audit services with McConnell & Jones for $41,000 and outside counsel services with Norton Rose Fulbright for $95,000. I'll reserve my conference update for the item on our conference venue contract approval to talk about it more fully. And one other thing I just wanted to mention is that we are going, as I think we talked about at the last meeting, we are getting ready to issue you CPRIT email addresses. So you will be receiving emails from Shannon, from our IT team, from Shannon Cusick, to give you that information in detail. There will be a little bit of security training, but we have winnowed it down, so it's just the bare minimum to meet the requirements.
Could you explain why that's necessary, just real briefly?
It's
Email address. Yeah.
Because it's the use of the email system, and so security, the issues with phishing attacks and things like that, that's actually a state requirement that we meet, annual security training.
But is it a requirement that we use a CPRIT established email? Is that what you're saying, that now it's mandatory?
Well, it isn't a requirement, but it had been a request from several members to have.
But if I choose not to use it or choose to use it, if I choose to use it, I need training. But if I choose not to,
Correct.
I don't have to get the training.
Correct.
All right.
Members, are there any further questions for Ms. McConnell? Hearing none. Moving on to the next agenda item, Ms. McConnell, will you explain the recommended contract approvals, please?
Yes, thank you. So I'm pleased to bring you a recommendation to award a contract to the Moody Gardens Hotel, Spa, and Convention Center for a conference meeting to be held in October of 2023. The estimated cost of the contract at this time for meeting space and food and beverage catering is a little over $200,000. There's also an estimated cost of about $52,000 for audiovisual services, which would be through the Moody Gardens preferred audiovisual provider. But we'll have to contract that separately, and we will this was based on our RFP, the bid that we received. So once we have more details on our program and ascertain needs, we will finalize that contract with audiovisual. And if it exceeds $100,000, we would bring that back to you for approval. As I mentioned, because of the RFP, we used an estimate of about 750 conference attendees, but the actual cost of the contract, especially when you consider catered food and beverage costs, may increase if attendance goes higher, which we hope it will. One of the primary factors that we chose the Moody Gardens Hotel was the available date of October 1st through 3rd, with October 2nd and 3rd being the actual dates of the conference. And we felt that this would be beneficial for all to get the largest turnout of conference attendees, especially when the largest number of grantees that we have are academic institutions, and we'd like them to attend. And there are several training programs that with students at several of our institutions, and so we want to make sure that those trainees are also able to attend. Some other factors that affected our decision were some concessions and discounts, including a waiver of $23,500 in meeting space costs if we meet certain guest room night and catered food and beverage targets. And then there are additional advantages. One is that the Moody Gardens is in one location with the guest rooms and the meeting rooms under one roof. And then, in addition, the Galveston Island Convention and Visitors Bureau also is offering CPRIT a $3,000 sponsorship based on the conference meeting at least 80% of the requested guest room nights. So that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions.
Members, any questions?
I just have a comment. I hadn't seen the sloth in Moody Gardens for over 10 years. I hadn't seen it, and I saw it last month, just for the record. There is a sloth in there.
A sloth?
Yeah, I had never seen it.
There's a what?
A sloth.
You didn't want to talk about the free parking?
And there's free parking, so that makes it even better.
Just Heidi, that's really good news. Thank you for working on that. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Members, is there a motion to approve contracts with Perriman Group, Weaver and Tidwell, and Moody Gardens Hotel?
So moved. Oh. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any sloth-like people opposed? Hearing none, motion is approved. Moving to the next agenda item, I will recognize the Chief Strategic Initiatives and Intellectual Property Officer, Ms. Tracy Davis, to provide an update on CPRIT's intellectual property project.
Good morning. So I'm here this morning to talk about intellectual property. As you know, we track intellectual property generated from our CPRIT-funded research activity for a variety of reasons. I mentioned them in the memo, but just briefly, the intellectual property represents a measure of the useful contribution to understanding cancer and the prevention and treatment of cancer. It's also a critical component to any commercialization and practical utility from inventions that are generated as a result of CPRIT-funded grant activity. And then finally, our grant contracts provide revenue sharing terms for any revenue that's generated as a result of intellectual property from CPRIT-funded grant activity, and those revenue sharing terms are typically tied to the intellectual property. So we have an interest in tracking this for a variety of purposes, including those. The project that we've been undergoing is one to look at the reporting to date and to try to ensure that we get to a point where we are receiving consistent, timely, and accurate and reliable reporting from our grantee institutions so that we can construct a robust picture of the intellectual property around any individual grant, and so we can aggregate this data and use it and analyze it for a variety of purposes as well. There's several steps to this project. Perhaps the first two are what are addressed in this update memo, and those two steps, as I view them, are really getting an understanding of what we have right now. How have we been getting in the information? How useful and reliable is it? What are the hiccups to it? What are the variabilities across institutions, deficiencies, things like that? That has been a big project. CPRIT has several provisions in our grant contracts that entitle us to a tremendous amount of information, which is great, but not all of that information is critical for us to have on a rolling basis to be able to construct this robust understanding of what the IP is. And so it's not as efficient as it could be in terms of both CPRIT's receipt and understanding of the information and the burden on the grant recipient to providing the information. And so we spent a lot of time looking at what the variables are, what institutions are reporting. We have institutions that, send us a very bare minimum notice. Dr. Smith filed an invention disclosure. Here it is. Some keep us copied on every single email communication with every inventor and every patent attorney in every jurisdiction in the world. So we really wanted to look and kind of get a handle on what's being done. And then we took a very rigorous view of what is it that we think we really need to understand to develop the type of database that we want to build out to make the reporting more streamlined for the institutions and to make our database more streamlined and yet at the same time more useful. I consulted extensively with our grant recipient institutions, with our staff. Dr. Smith in particular has been a tremendous resource, and Kristen and Wayne and all of the other senior staff, as well as Patty, have been very supportive of this process. We identified a limited number of items that we want to be reported on a regular basis. We constructed a standardized reporting spreadsheet for each. It was individualized for each grant recipient institution. We constructed a tool for them to name documents in a uniform format to provide to us so we can drop them into a comprehensive database very quickly. And I'm happy to report that the grant recipient institutions that receive the vast majority of our grant funds have already implemented this reporting process, and we are well on the way to backfilling any deficiencies in any IP reporting. I anticipate having that completed by October. So we've made good progress, and that's where we are. The next steps will be, once we build out this complete data set, to select and construct a database for CPRIT's use that will drop this data into. That there's a variety of issues with that, and I'll report on those later. But just to as a preview, all of these institutions use different databases. There's a few that use the same, but across them there are multiple different databases, including many that have been constructed by the institutions for their own use, and they don't really talk to other institutions. So that'll be a challenge that we'll have to address next. And then once we get that database, then we have the fun part, I think, starts, which is what do we want to do with the data? How do we want to use it internally? What portion of it is non-confidential that maybe can be externally facing? And I'll come back and report on that later. So that's it for now, unless you all have any questions.
Thank you. Dr. Rice, please.
I'll jump first.
Sure.
Thank you, Tracy.
Yep.
Very interesting work. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions that just for thought and maybe discussion as you go along and as we go along. First, it's interesting to think about disclosures. Disclosures in commercialization offices in isolation sometimes may mean something to that office, might mean something wholly different to another office. So I know it's not in the cross-institutional construct right yet, but do we routinely get notices on disclosures?
So I'll have two parts to answer that question. One, we do get routinely, they are obligated under the contract to provide us disclosures, and the institutions have been great about doing that. You're right, the nomenclature is different. And so that's why we have these individually constructed reporting spreadsheets that have, even if the nomenclature is different, whatever column A is, or it's column D in the spreadsheet, whatever column D is for MD Anderson may have a different header, but I know it means the same thing as column D for this other institution. So we're trying to harmonize those issues, but it is an issue.
But my point, maybe I wasn't clear, I'm trying to say is that if there's a disclosure about an invention that is happening at, I'm just making it up, MD Anderson.
Right.
And maybe that commercialization office says, we're not going to proceed with the patent application because we got 14,000 others.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be in isolation. But it might actually, if others someplace else in another institution knew about that disclosure, they might think, wow, that plus this disclosure is a real game. We should do an application. So I was wondering about the idea is that once we have patent disclosures coming, if there's a cross-fertilization mechanism you can imagine in the future.
Yeah, so I totally misunderstood
Sorry.
the question.
Sorry.
That's okay. That is a perfect example of some utility that we may identify and be able to take advantage of down the road. And I will add it to our list. My immediate reaction to that is a primary issue with that will be that at the disclosure state, that information is confidential. It's highly confidential information to that individual institution. So that will require getting over some resistance, to perhaps put it mildly, that individual institutions may have to disclosing that information to other institutions. But it's certainly something we can add to the list for potential use of the data down the road.
Yeah, I mention that because I think that is an opportunity, and those institutional barriers are false barriers that we allow to go on, maybe even across the same larger institution, University of Texas, for instance. So I would say strongly we should think about that. That could even be something that we would recommend to the legislature. You could imagine even another kind of review council that says, okay, we got a review council, we'll stay in this, construct confidential, but we want to see all the disclosures so that we can see if there's additions that come out to be synergistic, applications that could be made. Anyway, future talk.
I will observe that I think the number of invention disclosures that are filed on CPRIT-funded activity that do not mature into at least some sort of patent filing are relatively low.
Okay.
But the way your question was framed, it seemed to be more focused at those, and those then would continue to be considered confidential. So, but we can deal with it.
Just wanted to raise that as a thought. Thank you.
It's a good suggestion.
Dr. Rosenfeld.
Tracy, I think this is a really interesting project, so good luck. And this may really have a positive effect on the return on investment of CPRIT funds. So good luck and keep working away. And I have two real quick questions. I'm trying to get an idea of the big picture. Could you give, I know you may not have all the facts, but could you give an impression about how many published applications there have been and how many granted applications there have been based on CPRIT? Is it 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000?
Granted, you mean issued patents?
Issued patent and published published
patent applications.
Published patent
applications. We have those numbers. I don't have them handy, but it's in the hundreds.
Which category, please?
Patents awarded?
I think it's in the hundreds certainly of published patent applications. And if you just talking about United States patents issued, I suspect we're probably close to 100 or more.
Maybe you get that information out to everybody.
Yeah.
And the other question is, when do you think there'll be a draft operational database, something that may be final, but you could look at?
Well, I think we'll have the bulk of the data in a series of spreadsheets that we can make use of by the end of this year.
Okay.
But that's not a comprehensive database. It would be fragmented, but we'll be able to use the data and assess it pretty robustly, I think, by that point. But in terms of a comprehensive, easily searchable, internally or outwardly facing database, I think we have several months before that will happen.
Thank you for your efforts. Really important work.
All right.
Thank you. So the chair recognizes CPRIT's Communications Director, Mark Loeffler, to update us on CPRIT's communication activities. Mr. Loeffler?
Good afternoon, members. You've got my report, I believe, on tab 17. A couple of significant items. Obviously, just approved the contract for the conference for 23. So we're already starting a little bit of a very early promotion on that. We can't do a whole lot until we actually get a signed contract from Moody Gardens. But once that happens, we'll be ramping up the promotion for the conference next year. So we're excited about that. We're also ramping up the annual report work. So we've started that process with the ultimate goal of getting that annual report ready by the end of the year for legislative review, of course, when the session comes in this sacred building next January. So there are a couple of those big items. The other very present update is we got some really good coverage on KXAN here in Austin yesterday afternoon. I don't know if you saw that. I provided a link in your news clips today. We've also got another reporter from KXAN on their way here, hopefully to do a little interview with Dr. Patel shortly. So that's good coverage, and we take good coverage when we can get it. It's positive coverage. It's a great story. So they're very excited about the grants that were approved today, and I expect more of that. That's what I want. So that's my goal.
And I will say, I did get to watch the segment prior to going over to the dinner last night, and I believe that it was the best local reporting on CPRIT and CPRIT activities that I can recall. So if we can get a link to it, Mark did a great job with it, but the information that he provided to KXAN was used as an intro to Mark coming up and put out all of the salient metrics about CPRIT. You know, I wish we could bottle it and patent it and put it in the database.
So that's always good news.
Question? Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate
it.
We will not take up standing agenda items 21, 22, and 23.
Excuse
Oh,
me.
you've got, sorry, I beg your pardon.
I'm just going to jump in. I have numbers to respond to your question, Dr. Rosenfeld. The number of filed patents is 557, and the number of granted patents is 110.
20%.
Can you send me an email on that?
Yes.
Appreciate it.
If there's anyone else who wants to jump in, please do. If not, let me finish, because some of the members want to leave. Long journey. We will not take up standing agenda items 21, 22, and 23. The proposed dates for the Oversight Committee's regular quarterly meetings and subcommittee meetings for fiscal year 2023 are in your meeting packet behind tab 18. There will be a special meeting of the Oversight Committee on September 14. Is there a motion to approve the proposed meeting dates for the regular meetings of the Oversight Committee and the subcommittees for fiscal year 2023?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. If there is no further business and there is no objection, the chair moves to adjourn this meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. The meeting is adjourned.